Hello, everyone. My name's Roy. Sorry we're starting a little late today. Most of it's probably my fault. You know, it's the audio-visual thing. There wasn't that audio-visual kid in middle school, right, that you had to run all the projectors and stuff. So we're still running into a couple little problems, I see, and we're not 100% sure why. So, but we're going to kind of carry on anyways. We were hoping to get a close-up camera so you could see some of the stuff that was going on right here, right in front of me. But yeah, Kaylee can get up and move around. And she's behind the camera. So again, my name's Roy. If you don't know, Daisy's here with me today, hiding over here. And we're going to talk to you about a few things today about stained glass in particular. So if you have questions, feel free to just reach out to us, right? You can send a comment below, right? Or is that how we do it?
Make a comment in the video
there you go.
below, and I can read it to Roy and Daisy. So you guys can have your questions answered live.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about just kind of a really brief sort of introduction to stained glass, and it is, there are no silly or stupid questions. So if you have a question, just feel free to ask, because I'm not sure how easy it is for me to explain it and people understand me. So I always think I make sense, but sometimes I don't. So, welcome. Come on in. So we're, for those of you watching this on Facebook, we're live, here in our Delphi Creativity Center in Lansing, Michigan, and so we got people coming in, and they're kind of watching it, so it's just kind of fun. I mean, the room is like packed, so it's like
totally.
It's like, I'm just kidding. There's like 2 people because it's like the weather. Again, we're in Michigan, and for whatever reason, the weather likes to always mess up on us. So we've got a really nice winter day out there, even though it's November, right? So let me just start then about talking about some stained glass. So there is a couple of different ways of constructing stained glass panels or windows. And I have a couple of examples here I'll grab and show you. I guess when we said we were going to do this, I didn't really mention specifically what I was doing, but we are doing what's called the copper foil technique. So this first panel here, I'll show you. This is lead cane. So this is constructed by strips of lead, and then the glass fits into the lead, and then you solder it just at the joints, like where the lead comes together. Typically, we would cement this or putty it. You put in this material that we kind of cram it into all the gaps here. I don't know if you can hear this one, but it's a little loose. The glass is loose because we didn't cement this one, mainly just because we have it here in the store and it just hangs in a window. But most church windows are made this way, right, with the lead. And we have classes on doing this for those of you that are close by or want to come visit us. And today, for some reason, I'm not the lead cane person here, so I don't really do a lot of lead cane. I certainly know about it. But if you have lead cane questions, feel free to ask me. If I don't know, I'll pass it on to Daisy, and I'll have her answer them. So, just kidding.
Right.
I'm just kidding. But what I'm going to talk about today is copper foil, which here we think it's a little, especially if you're brand new to this, we think it's an easier way of kind of getting into stained glass. One reason why it's a little more forgiving. So what's going to happen is we're going to cut like all these pieces of glass. Each piece of glass gets wrapped in a copper foil, which I'm going to show you guys what that looks like in just a couple minutes. And then we solder it, and the solder only goes to where the foil is at, and that's what holds everything together and gives it the stability to the piece. We think this is a little bit easier because it's a little more forgiving. So if you're not great at cutting, let's say you cut this piece and you cut it a little small, well, if there's a gap between these two here, we can just fill it with solder. We just melt some solder, fill the gap, and it's still going to hold together. It's still going to look pretty good. The issue with lead cane is, as I was showing it to you earlier, the lead has a very specific width to it. And so if you cut this piece a little small, we can't have a hole in the window, right? There can't be a gap going all the way through the window. So then you have to cut again to make it fit. So sometimes the cutting, we think, has to be a little more specific with lead cane. Not as much room for error. The lead cane panels tend to be a little more decorative than realistic, like a sailboat or something like that, right? So it just depends. One's not better than the other. I don't think one's even stronger than the other. I think a lot of it's just personal preference. So if you're into look like prairie style or craftsman style, Frank Lloyd Wright style windows, if you're familiar with what those look like, very geometric normally, right? Victorian style with simple sort of designs. Lead cane works fairly well for those types. If you're doing something that's a little more expressive, maybe a nature scene or something that these kind of free flowing lines, some people find a little more expressive. Again, but personally, I'm a copper foil person, so I'm going to make it sound like it's the greatest way to do stained glass. But But I can tell you that if our lead came instructor was here, she would tell you that that's the greatest way to do stained glass. So again, just a matter of opinion.
So it looks like the kiln is like framed as well.
Yes,
you can use it to frame like the copper foil.
You bet. Yeah. So you'll notice there's a frame. I don't know if you heard the question, but that somebody was asking me about the frames that are around these pieces. So these are zinc. I'll have a sample of that. I can show you what that looks like. But yeah, we try to frame all of our panels, or we call these little windows panels, and we try to frame all of them in zinc. And just for a couple reasons. One is aesthetic, right? Kind of gives it a nice little look, like a frame on it. The other is structural. We think the zinc around the outside adds some stability to the panel, which I'm a firm believer in that. I think it does. I don't know how well you can see. I'll maybe go a little bit closer, but Kaylee will show on that, and then I can show you guys. But you can see where we'll solder right to the zinc, and then that's what kind of adds some strength to it. I don't know if I'm going to have time today to show that. I am going to show some soldering for those of you that are sticking around and watching. And I'll talk about the zinc, but I don't think I'm going to have time to actually probably add the zinc to it, just because of time constraints, right? But that's something normally we would teach, right? So again, if you're looking at like classes for us here at Delphi, we have like an all-day stained glass class where you can learn how to make a small panel very similar to like those I showed you, and either lead came or copper foil, and they're 8 hours long. They're pretty long, but you'll get through the whole step. That's what we try to do. Like a lot of our customers, don't live close by, so we try to accommodate people that aren't across the street from us. And so we do try to do just one-day classes where you can come in. We're going to teach you to cut glass, whether it's copper foil or lead. We'll teach you how to assemble it that way. We also have, like for copper foil, we have a short little class that's only 2.5 hours long. It's called a stained glass workshop, and I didn't bring one in, but we make these little heart suncatchers, and it's a way of, if someone isn't quite sure, right, and doesn't want to maybe invest all the time or all the money into into a longer class, they can just try that out. And again, same deal. You'll get a kind of brief. You'll cut some glass. You'll solder. You'll do all those steps. So, which is pretty nice.
And we have that option on Zoom.
Yeah, we also have that same one on Zoom. So I'm doing about a 2.5 hour class on Zoom that does that. So again, if you don't live close by, of course, you can always come visit us. We would be happy to have you guys come. A question?
How about freeform stained glass pieces that don't have a rectangular?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, I'm not sure how well those of you that are on Facebook can hear the question, but she was asking about something a little bit more freeform. Sometimes we make things that we hang just in the window that we would call a sun catcher, and they often don't have straight sides like the two panels I showed you there. And this is a piece that Daisy made that she's going to talk about in just a few minutes here. So that you can see is a very irregular looking outside edge, right? I mean, she's got all these fun hexagons in here creating the shape, but it could be, again, any kind of freeform thing. So it's doable. There are some considerations we have to take sometimes just for durability or strength, but if you solder it correctly and put it together, it holds up pretty well. I mean, this one's been hanging for a while.
I have these clear triangles here to kind of support some of these pieces that are hanging off a little bit more. Just kind of adds another side to it, so it's not going to ever pull out of there. So,
how about like round pieces? How do you finish the outside because you're not using cane per se?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, round pieces. So we have a couple options when we're doing round pieces. So the lead here is what's called an H channel, meaning that there's a channel on both sides of it, right? And if you look at it from the end of the lead, it kind of looks like the letter H. And so glass slides into each channel, but they make a U channel lead, so that's soft, right? So that's the advantage to lead is it's softer than the zinc. And so you can take the lead and bend it around the outside of something round to give you kind of a finished edge to the piece. Daisy's going to show you something, again, a little while here, very similar. She's going to work with a lead cane that's a little smaller than what we might use for these kind of things, but still the concept is the same. But the other option that we have is on some of the zincs, depending on the size of the circle, you could bend those into a circle. Delphi sells a cane bender, it's called. So I always careful about trying not to make these presentations into a big infomercial where we're trying to sell a bunch of stuff. But that's what we do here, sell stuff. But we have these cane benders, which are really, really nice. I mean, if you're doing a bunch of circles, last week, actually, a customer came in and I helped her bend a circle into a piece. So if you live close by, those of you that live close by, and you're ever doing something round and you need something bent on the circle, we could certainly help you do that. So that wouldn't be an impossible thing. So, but.
Can you not also solder like the edges as well?
Oh, sure. Yeah, like the piece that I showed from Daisy's here, right? This piece here that Daisy made. Again, the question was about the edge, right? So here, this is just soldered. I mean, there's nothing on the outside other than the foil that's around there. So sometimes people just do that. It's purely a matter of personal taste, which to me is one of the reasons why I like stained glass. Because, I mean, some people try to make it sound like there's a bunch of rules you have to follow, but there's not really. I mean, you can, whatever you can make, and if it stays together, I mean, that works. And I mean, this edge looks great for this piece. I think it's a nice, delicate edge. It's nothing really, big and clunky that you might get if you're putting trying to put zinc on there or trying to put lead on there. But
yeah, I made that in June or July of 2021 when we opened back up after closing down for a while. So it was 2020, wasn't it? Yeah, so that's been hanging for a couple years.
yeah.
It's maybe a little bit bowed, but it's not going to come apart. Yeah.
Yeah, in this situation here, what Daisy has done, she's using this chain as also the support system, right? So the chain isn't just soldered to the edge and then we're hanging from that. The chain goes all the way around the whole piece, and so that's helping support the weight, so which does help with the durability of the piece. So, today we probably aren't going to really go over too much about attaching rings and that kind of thing, but normally you would, if we had to attach rings here somewhere, it's like the question you were asking about the, pieces that are irregular shape. You have to figure out where to attach rings or some kind of hanger to them. And then so there's decisions to be made, and some are better than others as far as durability and how well it will hold. For example, since this is pretty easy to see, if I solder a ring just to here and here, it's going to eventually just pull off because there's nothing really holding it on except that foil that we put around the outside edge. Now, if I put the ring down in this joint or a ring down in this joint, you can see where it's going to touch multiple surfaces, and that's going to add some strength to it, and less likely the ring's going to fall off. So usually what we say with any kind of rings is you want to attach them into some kind of a seam somewhere, because that's where you'll also get strength, because you'll actually solder that ring here, and it'll tie right into that seam, which then gives it some strength to it. Does that make sense? Good. Well, good. Those are like advanced stained glass questions. I like that. That's wonderful. Yeah, thanks. You took one class. Nice. No, that's all it takes is one class, and then you
I'm hooked now.
you know just enough to be dangerous, right? Yeah, it's easy to get hooked, right? I tell you, I know it is for all of us here. That's why we all work here at Delphi, right? Because we love it. So I want to go over, so again, for those of you that are totally new to this, I just want to go over some basic stuff, some cutting, some foiling. I am going to solder a little bit on this panel, and I know we got started a little late, so I don't want to eat into Daisy's time too much because.
Eat away.
No, we're gonna. So what I have in then here in front of me, I guess I can just move that since we're not using that camera. Is I got a piece of glass, and I want to move that lead out of the way because we're no longer talking about that. And I'm going to talk about cutting real quick. So I have a couple of glass cutters here, and I can tell you that the only real difference between them is how you hold on to the cutters. Right? This is what we would call a pencil or a pen style cutter. So you hold it a lot like you do a writing utensil. This is a pistol grip held into the palm of your hand like this, right? And you can use it this way. And, like one doesn't work better than the other. I think it's just personal preference. What feels more comfortable in your hand, and again, a lot of times for people that are brand new, it's hard to tell, which one feels good. Takes a little while to get used to either one of them. So I learned on one like this. So this is what I always lean to personally. I always use these types of cutters. So. If you were taking a class from me, I would have everybody start out with one of these just to see how it goes. But
Both swivel?
yeah, so on these, we're asking about the cutting head. So the way that they're made is, so there's a cutting head on the end, and you can see probably on both of these, the heads swivel a little bit. And that is intentional that the heads swivel. It's because when you do a curve, the head is more likely to turn with you as you go. If the head is fixed and you're trying to do a curve, then you run the risk of dragging the cutter. Because what's on the end of the heads here is a tiny little wheel. I know it's really hard to see, but there's a tiny little wheel on the end of that. And it just rolls across the glass. That puts a scratch in the glass, and then called a score. And that's where we break the glass. So glass breaks wherever it's weakest, and all we're really doing is just putting a weak spot in the glass and hoping it breaks on that line, right? I mean, it sounds like it should work that way all the time, right? It should always just, wherever I scored it should just break. I'm cheating, and I grabbed a piece of window glass, which is probably got to be one of the easiest glasses to cut. But since I'm on live and I want to make sure I don't mess up, so I just think it's easier. To be honest, I think it's easier to see the score line when you're on clear. So sometimes like people ask me about cutters and they'll say, well, how do you know when they're wearing out? And I'll say, well, part of it is you'll notice that maybe it's not cutting like you expect it to. But if you can score a piece of clear glass and look at the score, just because it's easier to see your score on clear than on a color or on a texture, then you can kind of get an idea of what your score should look like. And I'm going to show you guys a couple of scores, and then hopefully you can get an idea of what we're doing here. So scores are one-shot deals. So you'll notice it wasn't a sketchy drawing sort of a line, right? Just one continuous movement. I pushed when I did that. So you can actually push or pull, but we teach people to push because you can see where you're going if you're pushing, right? If you're pulling, you can't really see what's going on. So I did that score. I'm going to do another one over here just to give you guys an idea of what some different scores look like. Yeah.
It sounds so satisfying.
Yeah. Did you like the sound? Some people hate the sound. In fact, it might even be somebody that works here that can't stand the sound. They said it's like nails on a chalkboard or something, right? I'm with you. I think the sound is like, oh, that's nice. So I got a couple scores here now. I'm going to pass these to the few hundred people that are in the room. If you guys take a look at those two scores real quick, because I did one harder than the other, right? So I kind of used different pressure on those two scores because I wanted you guys to kind of see what they look like. And if you could see those fairly well, I can tell you that the first score that I did, the lighter score, is the better score, not the heavier score. So it's one of those things that surprises people sometimes about glass. A lot of times when we're cutting, materials that are hard, you think, well, the harder I push into it, the better it's going to cut. Glass is probably an exception to the rule. So the score line should look like a fine hair laying on the glass, not a piece of string. So if you see, hopefully you guys noticed it when I passed it around, or you saw it when Kaylee had it. If you saw little white pieces of glass kind of popping up off the score line, that's pushing too hard. So I mentioned earlier that glass breaks wherever it's weakest, and I can tell you that a lot of the stained glass that's manufactured, it has all kinds of stress points in it. I mean, there's weak spots in all that glass just from how it's manufactured, unlike window glass. Mm-hmm. So because of that, if it's breaking and then it hits one of those weak spots, it's going to shoot over there because those little bits of glass popping on there are little tiny breaks in the glass that you can't see. They're microscopic, right? So this really light one is the better score. This nasty one, though, since I did window glass, that one still breaks pretty easily. But normally how we break the glass is with a fancy tool like this. These are called running pliers. You'll notice that they have a big screw on them. That is the top part of the plier. You want to use those always with that on top. If you look at the nose, there's usually a line on there, too, that will help you line it up with your score line so you can kind of see where you're going. So I'll show you real quickly here so I'm just going to come up onto the glass. And what you want to do is line up the middle of the plier with that score line and then just give it a gentle squeeze and the glass just breaks. They're called running pliers because the score breaks and then the score runs, the length of the glass. That was something else I was going to say. Hopefully you noticed that when I scored the glass, I did it from one edge to the other, right? So I wasn't just score it halfway through and then went and ate lunch and then came back and then finished the score up, right? Mm-hmm. You're sort of committed once you're in it. And I mentioned before, if you don't think you have a very good score, then you should probably go somewhere else on the glass and just make another score because trying to go over the same score you just made is probably near impossible. I mean, if you saw that tiny little wheel, you'll never get it in that same groove. So, yeah.
Tool.
Sure.
I know those are like diamond wheel on the end, aren't they?
They're actually carbide steel. So the wheel on this is a carbide steel. So
What are the lengths of usability on a tool like that? How long do they last?
A tool like this, they last 2 years, 4 months, and
37 days.
37 days, and 2 hours after that. 2 hours. So yeah, we get people ask us all the time about. So what's really nice about the cutters, either one of them, is that the cutting head is replaceable. So when this gets dull, you just have to buy a new head. So you don't have to necessarily buy a whole new cutter. And people ask me all the time, well, how long do they last? And I'm like, I'm not really sure because I don't know how you work, right? So it is one of those things that obviously use. So if you use it a ton, it's going to wear out faster. But it also is if you abuse it, right? I mean, if you push really hard, if you're always scoring really hard, or I see people that, well, here I'm working on this nice surface, but sometimes people work like on a metal table, and they score really hard, and when they go off the edge, they hit the table with the cutter, right? Because they're just pushing too hard. I mean, that you can see would shorten the life of a cutter. So again, if you get a nice light, even score is probably the key. But I mean, I have a couple of cutters at home that probably are, I don't know, 5 or 6 years old. The cutting head is. So I don't cut every single day, but I cut a lot. So and then around here, I can tell you, we cut. I mean, you'd be probably some of you would be totally surprised at the amount of glass we cut in a day here at Delphi, right? I mean, hundreds of square feet, and the cutters last. I bet we get more than a year out of them. And again, we're cutting every day hundreds of square feet, so it's pretty good. So.
What is that service you call it?
Yeah, great question. This service, I should invest in this company because I sell a lot of these boards, right? Don't I, Kaylee?
You do.
So this is called a Homosoap board. It's something we sell here at Delphi. What a surprise, right? I haven't shown you anything yet that we probably don't sell. But it's a Homosoap board. It's some kind of compressed material. Again, what's really nice about it is if you're scoring and you run off and you hit it, you're not going to damage your cutter any. And you're going to see in a couple minutes that I'm going to pin and solder on this board. And then so that's also nice about it too because it's not flammable. It won't just burst into flames. And you can pin into it like a million times, without any problems. I mean, we've had some, in the classrooms that are, I mean, they've seen a lot of use and they hold up really, really quite well. So it's just
How
nice.
does it compare to like cork board?
Yeah, so cork board will fall apart over time, and I know people use ceiling tiles a lot of times, and the same deal, they just fall apart. I mean, you pin into them enough, and it starts breaking down, right? I mean, I know that both of those things probably won't burst into flames if you lay your soldering iron on them, but what I like about this one is just the durability of it, right? I mean, they're not overly expensive, the board isn't, and like I said, it lasts a long time. So
We mostly replace them in our classroom when they get visually gross.
yeah, that's
We could still use them,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Gotcha.
But once they get really visually nasty, we're like, it's time.
Yeah, you're right. We're just making decisions based on what they look like because we, in our classroom, we think our stuff should look nice, right? So we replace them for that. But.
Before you move on, we've got a question from Nancy here.
Yeah, hey Nancy.
I've heard people will dip the cutter into oil instead of using the reservoir because they typically leak. Which is better?
Oh man, I knew this was going to come. I was trying to avoid the oil question because I have like a 45-minute rant on oil. No, so both the cutters I showed you guys are what we call oil cutters, meaning that so that the handles are hollow, so you can put oil in them. Because some people, probably lots of people, think that oil is a necessary product that you need to use when you're cutting glass. But I've been doing this for a long time, like 30 years maybe. I think I've never done the math, but mainly because I don't really want to. But and I've never used oil in a cutter because I didn't know I was supposed to. It wasn't until years later that someone said, "Hey, you're supposed to be using oil," and I'm like, "I am," and they're like, "Yeah, you can't cut glass without it," and I'm like, "I can't." Then what have I been doing for like 5 years, right? So here at Delphi, we use all these great oil cutters. We just don't put any oil in them. So Nancy, the question is, yeah, I mean, I know lots of people, to be honest, that do what you're talking about. They might take like a cotton ball, put some oil in it, and then rest it on there, as opposed to trying to fill it. Because if you fill these with oil, they do have a tendency to leak, which sometimes is kind of messy. I can tell you for me personally, one of the things I don't like about them, well, there's a couple of things. One is that I can't see my score line when I'm done because it's got a thin layer of oil on it, and I can't tell if it's a good score or a bad score, right? Because I like to look and know how I'm doing, right? Am I pushing hard enough? Am I not hard? Am I too hard? The other thing is, here's the thing that might surprise one person in the room, is that I'm always in a hurry. Stained glass is time consuming, right? And I'm an impatient individual, if you can't tell by watching me. And I got to clean all that oil off the glass before I can foil it, right? Because the copper foil won't stick to the glass with the oil on it. So to me, that's just one more step that I totally find unnecessary. And to be honest, thanks again for the question, Nancy, but I mean, I just don't think that the oil I don't think I cut any better with oil. So whatever. I mean, if you're using oil, great. You should keep using it. But so I'm not trying to talk people out of using oil. I'm just giving you hopefully there it was, I told you, it was almost a 45-minute rant on oil, wasn't it?
Here, let's switch it back to the Homosoap topic.
Thanks.
Tammy is asking,
Hey.
can you use Homosoap for leaded glass?
That's a great question. A lot of times for leaded glass, people will use plywood because you nail horseshoes into it to hold everything in place. Horseshoe nails? Not horseshoes. Horseshoe. Well, that would be interesting if you put horseshoes on it. Horseshoe nails you would nail into the board, and I think you'll find probably that a piece of plywood is probably more durable in that regard than the Homosoap would be. I've seen people do it, but like I said, you're just going to shorten the life of the Homosoap board. But But yeah, good question. I'm going to just try to do something real quickly here. Since I cut this panel out already and foiled it for you guys, because of time, I knew I wasn't going to have like a ton of time. But I wanted to show you how I cut a piece out, just so you guys could see what's going on. I'm going to cut this lovely sun here. So I am doing what's called the English method of stained glass, which involves tracing the pattern by looking through the glass and seeing the pattern, right? So you could do this if you had like a light box. So like if you had a glass that maybe was a little dark, you could use a light box to do this. Obviously, I'm using a transparent glass that we call a cathedral glass. So anything that is you can see through, we call it cathedral glass. And I'm just laying it on top of the pattern, just tracing. So if I had a piece of glass that I couldn't see through, I would do what's called piece patterns, which is some people are more familiar with. So I would take another copy of my pattern. That's why I got all these patterns floating around. And I would take scissors and cut out each paper shape, right? And I would lay that paper shape on and trace around it. And then that's where I would get my pattern. So, but here, I do this method whenever I can because, again, you guys already know, it's a time saver, right? And I'm lazy. So whatever can save you some time, that's what you want to do. So
sorry,
go ahead.
That's cathedral glass. What's the other kind?
Opaque is what we call it. So real simple, right? Sure. I mean, it doesn't have some fancy name like cathedral, but so if you can't see through the glass, we usually refer to it as opaque or opalescent. You might hear that term to describe it. But so you can see I traced it out. One thing you'll notice is that I didn't really trace it just tight up into the corner. I left myself some space. One reason why I did that is, so this tool is a great tool, but it only works if both sides are on the glass. And if you start getting really close to the edges, then this tool doesn't fit on the glass. And I think that maybe I waste a tiny bit more glass by doing this, but I think I save time. So for me, the time's more important than probably the little bit of glass that I'm wasting. So I'm going to show you how I might cut this out. I'm not really sure. I never know till I start cutting what I'm going to do. So I can tell you that again. If you showed this piece to 5 different stained glass people, they probably would start in different spots where to cut, right? So there's again one of those no right or wrong way. I just whatever makes sense in your brain. I'm cutting off this piece here, right? As you can see how I cut that one off. So hopefully one thing you notice is again I scored from the edge of the glass to the edge of the glass. I mean I've taught many classes where someone will come in and they'll only score the black line, nothing else, and then they'll try to break it out and they'll say, this won't break. And I'll say, yeah, because you got to come from an edge, right? You have to, the break has to start somewhere. It can't just start in the middle of the glass. So let's do this one. I got to do this one the responsible way. So there's again several ways of cutting out glass, but I'm going to show you the kind of the standard way. So do you see this, how I cut this off? Well, I'll give Kaylee a second to look at that. Right? So I cut that off like that. Because if you saw this shape here, there's actually 2 curves there, right? This curve and then the curve that kind of comes up. And then the safe thing to do is to do each curve separate. I mean, that's more predictable. Once you get more confident and comfortable with cutting, you don't probably have to do that. My problem is I get too cocky when I'm cutting glass, because I think I know what in the heck I'm doing, and then sometimes that gets you in trouble. Here's the thing, as I mentioned before, about running pliers, right? So if you can see, I'm trying to break this, and if you look here, you can see that this part is not on the glass, and so I'm squeezing this, and it's not breaking. So that's where another tool comes in. This is called a breaker grozer plier, and they have... the jaws are slightly different. One's slightly curved, right? Can you see that? And one's flat with a bottom segment. I know. This is what I'm doing to Kaylee. Can you see that? It goes.
It's okay. There is another Facebook Live where we did go over.
Oh, I think I did. Yeah.
So if you are wanting to see more detail on that, that can be found in our video section as well.
So I'm going to come in and use this way, right? So when we use running pliers, you use them with the direction of the line, right? With the way that the score is going to go. But here I'm using it kind of opposite of that, perpendicular, and I'm going to come in and just pop that out, right? And so if you look close, I mean, I got like a little bump there, but that's all right. We could take that to a grinder. I actually grabbed a little tool that I often use. This is called an abrasive stone. And sometimes these are nice because it's fast. It's just a way of just filing that up. Sorry, that's loud. It's just a quick way of just filing off little bumps that you don't have to worry about.
Do you sell those too?
Well, so amazingly enough, we do sell these. That's funny.
So it looks like you took the pliers and you broke them down? You didn't pull them like
Right. You're kind of in,
like,
you're
down
just
and away
like kind of pulling it off, and not like straight off, but
a little bit like on an angle.
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
like, if I exaggerate it, it is sort of both, right? So I am bending, right, but I'm also kind of pulling as I'm bending, right? So it's a little bit of this kind of a thing, right?
It's like
kind
you're
of pulling
biting
away
it
from
off.
it. I know, when I broke the glass with my hands, I did it kind of quickly, right? I was just snapping it, right? So it's the same sort of concept, except this is taking the place of my other hand, right? Because when I was trying to break that little piece off, good question. So let me show you guys real quick. I know I don't want to take 5 hours doing this, sorry. But let's say I'm cutting off this little piece off this glass, right? Maybe about 1/4 of an inch or so. And as I mentioned before, this won't work because this side of the player is not on the glass. And right, I could squeeze that all day. So I'm holding it in a nice firm grip here, and this comes in this way, and I grab it. And the key is, I know it's hard to see, but don't cover the score line, right? If you have the nose of the player over the score line, you get some nasty chipping sometimes. Mm-hmm. Well, I can tell you, sometimes with this tool, you just get some bad chipping. It really, probably more the tool than the glass. And then this is what I'm going to do, bend, and then as I'm bending, I'm kind of pulling them apart slightly. So it's fast, right? Yeah, I've done this probably a couple of times, so I make a lot of this look easy.
Does it matter where on the glass you're?
Not really. No, that's a good question. So, does it matter where I grab it? It doesn't, except I usually go from one edge or the other edge. And because in my head I'm thinking, I want it to start breaking here and then run there. But if I go in the middle, I'm asking it to break from two directions, and I think sometimes you do get more chipping that way. Mm-hmm. But it is, I don't know, I guess it's a matter of opinion.
I've got another question for you.
Yes.
He says the class I took in Ohio said to tap under the score line before using the grozers. You didn't do that, so is it necessary?
So I'm a bad influence on people. So I tell them not to use oil, and I tell people not to tap. But I know there's a technique where people tap the bottoms of the glass. So sometimes, like I scored this. I did it when we were doing other stuff, so you probably didn't see it, but I scored this. And so people will come in and tap the back of it. It's actually why these types of cutters have this kind of knob on the end. Even this one, right? You would come in, tap, 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 tap. I stopped tapping, probably 29 and a half years ago. So I just found it, again, what I found was happening, I was getting these irregular breaks, because of the tapping. And so I think the running players work so well. I'm going to show you on this one, actually. In fact, your question is almost perfect timing, because I have this nice, kind of a big curve that I'm kind of coming around, and I scored the whole thing, and I'm not going to tap it. But I'm going to come in on this side, and if I can ever just stop talking, I'm going to squeeze it gently. Oh, did you hear that little pop? It was subtle. So I started the break. Now I'm going to come to this side and do the exact same thing. And so I have it running. I don't know, you probably can't see it. It's too hard to see. It's running from about here to here and then run from there to there. I didn't get the rest of it, so I guess I could tap it, or I could just squeeze it a little bit more. Right? That just pops out. So what I did there, instead of squeezing like really, really hard and try to get it to run the whole way, I started the break and then went over to the other side and finished it up. It's a great way, even if you're doing big, long ones that are straight, right? Sometimes it's easier to start the break on one end and then go to the other end and get them to meet up.
So you squeeze it slightly less when you
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing, right? That's one of the really nice things about we sell a couple of different types of running players. The metal ones allow you to do that. They have a little more control over it. So just amount of pressure when you're squeezing with your hands, you can control how much pressure you're giving to break. And then I'm squeezing just so I hear that little pop noise, and then I stop, and then I go around to the other side. So
I will say I do that same thing with some of those larger sheets that kind of have the weak spots that he was talking about. So I'm not trying to run that whole thing.
Yeah.
I'm kind of breaking a little bit of it, going to the other side of the score, and kind of doing that to meet it in the middle. Okay. I find I get more clean breaks that way, and it doesn't really go off as much. So
yeah, I think they tend to be a little more consistent. I mean, while you're asking, then again, instead of having the break go from here all the way there, I had the break go here to here, and then now here I don't have to go as far, right? Because I've already got part of it broken, and I think that just increases your odds that it's going to break out for you. So.
So does some of the textured glass, it has a grain to it, it seems. And with some of my best efforts of trying to break it, it will break across instead of following a curve.
Yeah.
Is that normal, or am I?
Yeah,
doing something wrong?
I tell people that eventually it just comes down to the glass. A lot of times it really does. I mean, I'm sure Daisy can attest to this. I mean, I know around here, we'll cut glass. It'll be from this one brand. It's this one color we've cut it, and then you'll cut that same glass like 2 months later when we got a new batch in, and for whatever reason, it's just like, man, this thing just won't cut like crazy. So it's sometimes it's just the glass. I mean, we can't always blame ourselves when it doesn't work. I mean, as long as we know we're doing getting good scores and try to be nice, even, not pushing too hard, then you can blame the glass at that point. So, but yeah, sometimes, especially textured ones, right? I mean, they don't really have a grain to them like wood does, but they do have, when because they're rolled out, and especially if there's multiple colors added to them, and then there's a texture rolled on them. I mean, they have like all this kind of we've said a few times, just stress in them. So you just hit one of those stress spots, and that's where it's going to go. So
I do try to work on the smooth side, because there's
Yeah.
supposed to be a smooth side and
yeah, with texture, that's all you can really do is just pick the smooth side and just go on it. So
okay. good.
Nice,
I know
good.
I'm doing something right.
yes,
So, sorry.
Yeah.
And-
no, ask questions. That's why we're here, right? We're totally.
So with the curves, I've seen people, if they're deeper curves, they'll do like multiple
Yeah.
cuts. Is that something you do? Or?
Yeah, that is totally something we do. I'll do this real quick, and then I don't know why
I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine. Don't apologize. So, yeah, I mean, you guys are here, so I appreciate you guys coming to visit us. So you ask me questions, and I'm going to answer them. I mean, Daisy and I'll be here. We're here till 5, so we don't care. Whatever.
Yeah.
So I think you're talking about something like this, right? So like let's say I want this glass, but I want to get rid of this glass. So if you score this and you try to break it, I mean, if I just score it and try to get the running pliers on it and try to squeeze it, it'll break, but it'll break to about here, and then it just shoots off somewhere. It's hard to get it to curl back on itself, right? Asking a glass to, when you score and finish on the same side, that's not one of the things glass likes to do, right? It likes to go from one side to some different side. So how we approach these is we do some small scores, right? Smaller, I say shorter and shallower scores. So I have like a rule in my head that if this distance is greater than 1/4 of an inch, then you need to score it more than one time. So if this was shallower, I probably could have got away with just scoring it, but this is over 1/2 inch. So I'm going to have to score it multiple times. So I come in and score. So the whole time, all I'm thinking about doing is shorter and shallower, right? I'm going to draw on my score real quick just so you guys can see it, because I know it's not easy to see. That dashed line is the score I just made, if you can see that. So do you see what it looks like, right? So definitely shorter, shallower. Now, you can't break this out with running pliers because it's that same deal, right? I can't get the running pliers on the glass, so we have to use the breakers again. Again, remembering to use the flat side on top of the glass, and I'm going to come in here, and now I am going to a very specific spot, right? So here, I'm going to put the pliers. I'm not going to put the pliers here in the middle again, because you remember I'm asking it to break all the way out. And I don't put it here. And the reason why is because if I break this out and something breaks wrong, it might break into my piece, right? But if I come down here and break it, and if something goes wrong, it might break up into there, and I don't really care because I want to get rid of that anyways, right? So I am going to go to that one end using the breakers here, pull that little piece out, and then it just becomes a series of shallow, shorter scores. And then, like I've said a few times, that it's a confidence thing, right? I mean, how many scores, how few of scores can you do it in? And I know for me, I challenge myself all the time. When I'm doing something, I'll look at a piece and I'll go, in my head I'm like, I could do that probably in like 2 scores, and then sometimes I can't, right? And you learn a lesson. We all, glass has a great way of humbling you. Just when you think you know what you're doing. So I want to talk about one of the things as I break this off real quick, because I did it with the sun that I was doing. Do you see that there's hardly any marker on this piece of glass? Yeah. So the marker represents, it's the same thing as the line on this pattern represents the space the foil is going to take up. So whenever we trace things, whether I had cut this out of paper and traced it, you always want to cut the black line off. So if I were to cut this paper pattern, I would cut all the black lines off the paper pattern before I traced it, and then you cut all the black lines off. So again, always aim for cutting the inside of black lines. Your panels will just fit together better, and you actually don't have to grind as much, which again is time consuming, right? So I was telling you guys, to me, it's always about saving time. So I'm going to come in here, grab this one, pull this off if I can, right? And for the most part, I got most of the black off, right? Not too much. There's a little bit I might have to grind, but for the most part, I wouldn't have to do a bunch with that.
Let's circle back really quick. Tammy's got a comment. I've seen where people use heating pads to warm up the glass before cutting it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's again, we're in Michigan, and I can tell you today was like maybe it's 25 degrees here. So people do that. It really does make a difference. If your glass is warmer, it cuts easier. I can tell you that we notice it here. Like when they bring the crates of glass in during the winter, they'll wait till the next day to cut them just to let them kind of gain some, warm up a tiny bit. I know I do personally when I buy glass. And then, if I'm taking it home from here, I always, let it sit around to get warmed up. But yeah, people take heating blankets and put them over there just to warm them up. Especially if you're working in a studio or a garage or your basement that's maybe not heated or something. That's a great idea. The glass will cut easier, that's for sure. All right, so all that. Let me just, again, I want you guys to see the process. So this is a copper foil. I'm going to wrap copper foil around all this.
Yeah. He says, do they cut it while it's laying on it?
Oh, no. Normally just, I just lay it on top of the surface and then heat the glass up for a little bit and then peel it off and then go ahead and cut it. So, right. Yeah, but that's good. I've never tried cutting it from underneath. Maybe I'll try that sometime when I'm bored. This is copper foil. And the copper foil is has an adhesive on one side. So you can see this copper foil sticking to my finger probably, right? Because there's an adhesive on there. In this case, this one is silver. You want to take a look at that? Do you see the adhesive is silver colored? I didn't bring in samples of all the foil. Foil comes in different widths, and it comes with different colored backings. In this case, I'm using silver because the solder is silver, and I'm just going to leave it silver. So I'm, like this panel, right? The solder is this color, so that's how I leave it. But you can keep that as a souvenir if you like, or you can just leave it on the table. That's fine, whatever. So that's what this is, and so then we have to wrap this around every piece of glass. And I can tell you that, again, if you've been doing a nice job of cutting, and if you have to grind your glass, which, again, I probably might grind this one a tiny bit, but if you're drying them off as you do that, you don't have to clean the glass. You shouldn't have to clean it. You should be able to just come and foil it, right? I mean, having to clean the pieces is just one more step that just adds time to it. And again, as long as you're not doing anything that requires you to clean it, then you should be able to just go ahead and do it. So all we would do is just wrap this around. And I can tell you that for especially new people, and maybe not even new people, lots of people, this is their least favorite part of the whole process. It's actually my favorite part of the process. One reason why is because I know I'm almost done. And I think it doesn't require any brain activity. As you guys notice, I can foil and talk at the same time, which is... I do. I watch TV. I do it in front of the TV all the time, the foil. Now, I have a kind of weird way, a different way of doing it. And again, I'm just showing you guys today, this is how I do stained glass. I don't know if it's the best, perfect way, but it works for me. I did this on purpose. I exaggerated this. I always start at a corner somewhere or a point on my glass that I'm wrapping in foil. And you'll notice I left it a little bit longer. And I just take a pair of scissors and trim it back so that the foil matches that edge of the glass perfectly. Instead of spending 10 minutes trying to line up the edge of the foil with the edge of the glass, right? To me, because I don't overlap foil. I'm not an overlapper, which I know people, they talk about me. I know the overlappers.
Is it just because of the spacing?
Yeah, for me, I stopped overlapping the foil because, like, normally you could, right? Otherwise, you could start anywhere and you just come around and you overlap the foil, right? So then, but if you did that, every piece you have, there's a spot where there's two thicknesses of foil. Now, again, on a panel like this, it's probably not a big deal. Probably on most of the stuff you're ever going to do, it's not a big deal. But I've done like, an 800-piece lamp before. And I can tell you that if all 800 pieces have a spot that is a double thickness of foil, all of a sudden it doesn't fit together like you thought it did, right? When you ground it and got it all fit out, then you go foil it and you come back and you're like, this thing isn't fitting like I thought it was. Then you usually have to pop a couple pieces off and regrind them, put them back on, right? So I stopped overlap. I'm a non-overlapper. I know people. I know what you guys are thinking. You're like, that guy doesn't use oil, he doesn't tap, and he doesn't overlap. It's like,
My kind of guy.
is that it, Fix?
So you do enjoy the most time-consuming thing.
Yeah.
It's relaxing.
There's something wrong with me, isn't there? Is that totally?
He's always in a hurry, yeah.
Yeah, this is, I find, the most relaxing part of the whole process. You're right. So the hard part is obviously just trying to center it, right? I mean, I think, again, for those of you who haven't done it, we have to try to center it in the foil. The wider the foil is, the easier it is to center it because it doesn't care if you're not perfectly in there. I try to go as narrow as I can because I want thin-looking solder seams, but it's a matter of opinion, right? It doesn't really matter.
Is that the most common width?
Yeah, I'm using what's called 7/32,
Okay.
right, which is the most common size. A lot of times I'll try to use 3/16. I know on some of the glass I'm using here today, I couldn't have used anything narrower because it was textured. Something that you were talking about earlier, right, is that the textured glasses, you have to usually go with a wider foil just to make sure you catch all the high points, right? So I put it on there. Hopefully you guys are noticing when I handle the glass a lot of times when I'm foiling, I try not to handle the edges like this. I try to hold it more in the middle just so I don't get the oil from my fingers onto the glass, right? But and then we're going to burnish it as a term. So it just means rubbing the foil. I'm using this really nice burnisher that we sell here at Delphi. Hence the name burnisher, because I'm burnishing. Burnishing is just rubbing the foil, right? I'm just rubbing the foil onto the glass so it sticks a little bit better. And I just go around the outside edge first, and then we're going to do, technically it's called crimping, when you fold the foil onto the glass, right? And you can use the tool to do this. You can see how I'm kind of doing that top piece if you want. I'm going to, for those of you that are here in the room, I'm going to just do one side, and then I'm going to pass it around if you guys want to take a look at it, just for the, for the fun of it. But I can tell you that, when I first started doing this, people use all kind of tools for this burnisher. I mean, there's somebody that works here who just uses she'll use the Sharpie marker, and she does all her burnishing with that, right? That works. You just don't want to use anything metal, so plastic or wood works pretty well. So then you want to do one final sort of burnishing. You would set it on the table, so something where you have some support, and then go back over it. I mean, I have a real simple rule that if I run my fingers over it and I don't catch the foil anywhere, then I have it on there good enough, right? I mean, I guess, if there's foil, I mean, the one side I didn't burnish at all. For those of you that are here, if you want to take a look at it, just so you see the difference, right? Whatever.
But sometimes when I get to the point where it's on there but not crimped yet, I'll just take my fingers and run it down like that, and it'll...
And it crimps it. Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, I know there's a guy that, a customer of ours that has a studio. I mean, he does this for a living. And, I mean, that guy does, I don't think he uses any of these hand tools at all. He does everything with his fingers, right? That's crazy. He's fast, too. It's fast because you don't have to pick up a tool and do all that kind of silly stuff. Right?
I burnish it after I do that.
Yeah, but I'm trying to, my hands are already rough enough. I don't have to, really slice them all up with the copper foil. But so that's copper foil. That's putting the foil on it. I've done that already with this little panel that I am going to just show you some brief soldering on just because of time. Again, I apologize for those of you that were... I don't want to take away Daisy's, time. So I foiled this one already, and for some reason it doesn't fit because I stipped. So this is, if you saw the pattern, it's a sunrise or a sunset, I guess, depending on how you look at it. I know around here we traditionally do it with, nice warm colors for the sky and stuff, and sometimes these are green hills or they're white clouds, or this is water, or it's grass, or it's whatever, right? I've seen this done a million. I've seen these done purple as mountains. So it's a great ways of interpreting it, right? But I did it, you can see all in these, because it's freezing out and we've got a lot of snow, and I just was in that kind of a mood, so I did the entire thing as a winter scene. But there you go.
How do you do the straight lines? Just a ruler?
Oh, how did I cut the straight lines? Yeah, so there is a couple of ways we do it is with a ruler, which has a cork back so it doesn't slide on the glass, which is
Like
really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I know a place where you could probably buy one, just suggesting. But there's another tool that we sell that I really like. It's called a glass square, and it's way in the corner over there, and I don't want to go run and grab it. But so it's an L shape, right, and it's plastic, but it's got a little lip on it that'll catch the edge of a glass, and then you can just set it on the glass and score, and you'll always get a right angle. So it's really nice because I don't know if you guys know this, but the glass that we sell is not all cut into perfect squares. So, I mean, we don't, if you get one, you're lucky. But for the most part, the glass doesn't come to us square, so we just cut it down into, so if it's 12-inch squares or 10 by 16-inch squares, the corners aren't necessarily a square corner. So so this little, called a glass square, is a great tool for just squaring things up to get started, right? But it's also a great way, like here, I could have used it for these outside edges. In fact, I actually did, because the glass here was longer than what I needed. So I put that little glass square on and just scored it and broke it off. So it's pretty nice. And it's an inexpensive tool. It's probably one of the least expensive tools you'll ever buy for stained glass. But There's sales pitch. I said I wasn't going to do that, but I'm selling everything, people. Whatever. Heck, this panel's going to be for sale later. What? I'm just kidding.
On your Etsy site?
It's right on my Etsy site. That's what I said. So here's, speaking of selling stuff, so here's something else. These are these really nice layout blocks, they're called. And what they're for is just to kind of keep your panel in place. And those of you that are here, I mean, you guys can step up if you want to get closer. You can't see what I'm doing. Feel free to. It doesn't really. You won't offend me any. I did shower this morning, so if that makes a difference. So I'm going to pin these in place, and again, mainly for a couple reasons. One is so things don't move around while I'm trying to solder it. The other reason why is to keep the edges nice and straight, right? Because if I want to put zinc around the outside of this, we need to have, again, this edge, this edge has to be really fairly straight so this will fit on there. I mean, if this piece is too big and sticks out, you can't, because this is rigid and you can't really bend it. So. There we go, pinning this down. Again, I'm not going to go over probably everything on soldering. I'm just going to show you a couple things, and then we will, and I think you guys will probably hopefully get a good idea about what that's like. Sorry, we used to do these kind of things all the time, these little free presentations, and then, the pandemic hit, so we stopped doing them. And then we were like, we should do these again. And then I know for me, personally, I was like, I can't really remember the structure of how we were doing these, and I realized that maybe we could have given ourselves a little more time. But anyways, so I got it all pinned in, right? So it's not going to go anywhere. And the very first thing I'm going to do is something called tack soldering, and that's where I'm just going to add a little solder ball to everything just to hold the whole panel together. And I'm using what's called a 60-40 solder, which means 60% tin, 40% lead. So this is what we normally recommend for copper foil work because it stays molten the longest. So if you're trying to get, it has the longest liquid working range. So if you're trying to get smooth looking solder seams, that we think the 60-40 is the best for doing that. What I have in here is a flux. Flux is an acid. So it does a couple of things. One is it cleans any oxidation off the copper so the solder sticks to it. But it also, like a flux, just helps the solder melt a little smoother and flow a little easier. Yeah, go ahead.
Does the flux have a life to it? Because I found an old bottle from about 7 or 10 years ago.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's about 6 years. So you were close. You almost had it. No, it does have a life to it. But this is another question I get asked a lot of times about flux is, and it's one of those things that depends on a couple of things. One is like where you store it at. The other is if you contaminated it or not. So like, for example, if you guys notice, I didn't just dip the brush into the bottle because that can contaminate what's in there. So we pour it off into some other little place and then use it that way. And that way I'm not, always trying to get in there.
If you do need new flux, we know where you can find some.
Thanks, Daisy. Good. I don't feel like I'm the one that has to do the sales pitch all the time. So how do you know it's gone bad, right? That's what people ask me sometimes. So there's a few things. Some is just a visual clue, right? So look at it. Like you'll notice how most of them look relatively clearish, right? But if they get kind of cloudy looking or you see stuff floating in them, then that's usually probably a sign that it's going bad. And really what that means is it's just not as effective. It gets weaker. And then you would notice that you would put some on and then try to solder, and you'll notice that maybe your solder isn't flowing like you would normally expect it. Then that probably just means the flux is bad. But I would try it, right? I mean, why not? You still have it, right? So.
And then I know there's like a liquid and a gel, right?
Yeah, I was, so I'll try to keep my flux rant down to just a couple of minutes. No, I think fluxes are totally personal preference. I mean, really. We sell like 6 or 7 brands of flux just because they're different. Some are more fluid than others. We actually sell a paste, which is like, really thick. So it just depends. I personally find these ones that are not super gel, like not really thick gel, I find them easier to work with personally. And one reason why is because I try to use a very small amount of flux when I solder, and I just think that the more fluid it is, the easier it is for me to apply a little bit. Maybe that's backwards. The thicker ones seem like they stay in place more, I think, and then you solder them. Because the issue when we're soldering is, I'll touch on this briefly, is that, so when we're soldering, we're not breathing in any lead or fume, which people think we're not. We're not getting the solder hot enough to breathe in any of that. What you're breathing in is the flux burning off, which is probably not a good thing. So I try to use a really, really tiny amount of flux. One of the things I always do is I trim back the flux brushes. I mean, we sell flux brushes here, and the bristles are longer than this, and I cut them about in half. That way, when I dip into the flux, I'm not grabbing as much flux. And then I don't know if you notice, I mean, I grabbed a tiny bit. I wiped some of it off on the edge of this container, and then I did this whole piece with it, right? Which is plenty of flux, probably even more than I really needed. Good. Yeah, get closer. Look, this is the exciting part, people. So, I mean, before it was not good, but now it's really good. So I'm just going to melt a little bit of solder in there. And again, wherever two pieces of glass meet, I'm going to put a little solder ball. And again, the purpose here is just to hold everything together. I'm trying to get this so I can take the pins off is what I really want to do.
So you're tapping the actual glass itself.
Yeah, so that's surprising sometimes for people, right?
Yeah.
It's that I'm actually touching the glass. So I'm not hovering right above it and trying to drip onto there. I'm actually touching right onto it when I do it. And then I'm going to solder a couple seams for you guys, and I'm again, touching the glass the entire time. I'm not hovering above it. The other thing is, so I have this really nice iron stand here, and I have a sponge in here that I filled with water. And so I periodically wipe it on there. So if you see me doing that, I'm just trying to keep the tip clean as I'm working. It also kind of cools it down slightly because they tend to idle when they're plugged in and you're not using them right. And the tips oxidize. And when they're clean, it just grabs the solder easier. It's just easier to work with the solder. But this little bit of tack soldering holds this whole panel together. So this is tiny, right? I mean, this is not a very big panel, but you can see that this is held together, right? I can even pick it up, right? That tiny little bit of solder. I mean, I wouldn't normally recommend you do that, right? It's probably not a smart idea, but.
Before you move on real quick, Josephine is asking, what temperature should you have the iron for soldering?
Oh, that's a great question. So, there's different types of soldering irons. This particular soldering iron that I'm working with has a thermostat in it that regulates the temperature to 700 degrees. So I think, solder melts, this solder we're working with melts in the 550 range, somewhere in there. So you want something above that. And then it just becomes an issue of how comfortable you are, because you can go hotter, but then the solder melts quicker, and then you have to work faster, right? So personally, I find this one, this 700 degree one, a really nice one to work with. I think, especially for beginners, I think it's also a really nice one. It's not too hot or not too slow. Yeah, Daisy's going to use this one, I think, in a little bit. This is made by Weller's. This is a Weller 100. The one with the blue handle, light blue handle, and this one are our two most popular soldering irons here at Delphi. This is made by a Japanese company called Hako. Great soldering iron. It has a dial on it. You'll see that you can actually change the temperature. One of the interesting things is I'm pretty sure it's in Celsius, not in Fahrenheit, so you got to
I usually keep it around the 410 number. I think it's somewhere between 600 and 700, I believe.
Yeah, I think you're right? So same deal, right? So I mean, the advantage to this one is you can adjust it as you go, right? So the more comfortable you get and you want to work faster. I mean, again, I know people that do this for a living and they go as hot as irons as they can because they're trying to go quickly, right? Mm-hmm. I like to control what I'm doing, so I don't want it too crazy. But nice, right? So good question, somewhere in that range.
And one more question.
Yeah.
Nancy says, if I put flux on but can't finish the solder for a time, how long can the flux be on the piece without damaging?
That would be 23 hours and 45 minutes. So, we say you shouldn't leave it on overnight. Good question, though, because sometimes, especially if you're working on a nice large panel, then you might not get it all soldered in one shot, right? So you should clean if you're not going to get to it even till the next day, you should really clean the flux off because it'll start to oxidize. So I was going to talk about cleaners, but I'll just jump on and I'll talk about it since somebody asked. One of the great advantages to this particular cleaner, it's called Quick Clean, is it doesn't have to be rinsed off with water. Right, so you don't have to rinse this off. So if if this was my panel and it was big and I'm not going to solder it till tomorrow again or a couple of days, and I don't want to pick it up and try to carry it to the sink because I don't really have it soldered that well, you just spray it on there and wipe it off. You don't have to add any water to it. So it neutralizes the acid in the flux. I mean, that's what flux cleaners do. I'm going to show you another flux cleaner in a minute, but good question.
One more before you go to soldering, and this will lead you back. At what temp does 50-50 solder melt?
50-50 actually has a higher melting temperature. I know sometimes it doesn't make sense in my head either because it has a higher lead content than the 6040, but the melting temperature is slightly higher. It's not much higher than that, maybe 50 degrees higher. So a little bit. I mean, you could certainly do it with a 700 degree iron, but I know that sometimes that people do like lead cane work. They'll use a 50-50 solder to solder the joints because it's a little closer in color to the lead cane, right? Because it's 50% lead. And they'll use like a 600 degree tip because they don't want to melt the lead, right? So it's a fine line, right? I mean, it's like you want to get a temperature hot enough to melt solder but not melt your lead. So again, it's a comfort thing. I know people that do lead. In fact, the woman that teaches our lead classes uses the Wellers. And you just have to be quick, right? You just got to go in, set your solder down on the seams of the lead and get out of there.
She changes the tips to the 600.
Oh, does she?
well.
So there you go. So even better, right? She's changing. I did not know that she changed the tips.
Yeah, I have to change them back every time.
Oh, so that's how you know. So, that's crazy. Nice. Well, there you go. So Daisy knows. So, so now what I would do after I did this is come in and work these seams. And if I was just working on my own, I would probably not have to reflux. But since I paused and was talking, the flux can actually evaporate off your panel. So don't be surprised if you flex the whole thing and then you're soldering it along, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, I thought I flexed this. Well, you probably did, but it might not be anymore. I didn't dip back into the flux because there should be enough flux on the brush. I'm just hitting these areas. Again, I'm not going to do this whole panel, but let me just show you. One thing, hopefully you guys are noticing how I'm holding the soldering iron, right? Hold it like the handles of a motorcycle, right? Or a screwdriver, right? Not a pen or a paintbrush or something, right? Hold it in the palm of your hand. The reason why is, do you see the angle I'm getting to the panel here? I can get this tip right onto the glass. If I'm holding it like a pen, now look at the angle. All I'm getting is that little tiny part of the tip on there, and that's not enough. Because you guys know that I'm impatient. So when I'm soldering, I'm trying to just put that seam down and be done, right? That in a perfect world, that's what we want to do. We don't want to come back and have to keep reworking it. So here we go.
While you're soldering, Michelle is asking, why would you not tack solder at the joint?
Michelle, that's a great question. I'm not really sure why I don't.
I think it makes more sense to put it kind of where the two flat sides meet. So
You're also not going to get a thick solder ball at the joint then that way
Sure.
as well.
Right.
Yeah, you probably minimize that.
So I think it's easier and it holds it a little bit better if you don't try and, solder at this three-way point. And, I mean, it's going to hold it all the same. So it's just easier to kind of try and hit those
That's exactly
spots.
what I'm thinking in my head the whole time too. Is if you notice, like I look at the length of that and I tried to go to about the middle. I looked at the length of that, I went to about where the middle was. I mean, that's how I think when I'm doing it, because I think that what Daisy's kind of pointing at. Mm-hmm. I just think it adds a little more stability. Again, on these little small panels, probably doesn't make that big of a deal. But I do know. I mean, I know lots of people that just solder at where all the joints come together, and they go together. So now I cut this panel, and I did an okay job cutting this, right? So I mean, there's not any huge gaps in here. But if there was, that would be the next thing you would really do after tack soldering is coming in, like I have a tiny gap here. You would come in and just fill the gap. And one reason why is just fill it and then let it cool off and then come back in and try to make it look nice, right? I mean, if you spend all your time now trying to make it look nice, you might get it too hot. And then since there's a gap there, the solder can just bleed to the backside. I'm going to come in. I'll do another one then. So, I'll do this one. The other thing, maybe you'll notice that I did this seam here, and I didn't go all the way to the edge, right? Because I'm going to put some. I'm going to grab one of these pieces of zinc. I'm going to put some zinc around. The plan is that someday I'm going to put zinc around these, right? And so I need to have space. If I solder right up to the edge, then I won't be able to get the zinc on there. So I always back up. That's a little bit more than I normally do. Usually I do 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 inch, or something, whatever. But. Oh, go ahead.
So do you put that on and then fill the rest in?
Yeah, then we would do that. Yep. Maybe I'll do that, but I probably won't, but maybe.
Somebody told me once that the goal was to try to get a rounded bead of solder.
That is correct. Yeah, that's the goal, So that's exactly the term we use too. We call it a bead of solder. So you want this slightly rounded, right, bead of solder. And that is always the challenge, right? So, I mean, I can tell you that working here, I'm sure Daisy can attest to this. When we talk to customers, And the one thing they always say wish they did better when they do stained glass is soldering. I mean, people always wish they soldered better. And to me, I think it's really just, I put it in the aesthetic category, right? I mean, if you flat soldered your whole panel, it would stay together. I mean, it would totally stay together. And you can hang it in a window and light would come through it and it would look great. But, you know, stained glass people are like, oh, this has got to be really smooth and I got to have it just be slightly rounded and all this. So I guess it just depends on what you're looking for. I mean, I know I'm that picky. I'm always trying to make mine really smooth without any marks in it and try to get a nice little slightly raised surface. So when I solder, which I didn't talk about when I was doing it, when I'm soldering, I'm actually watching the solder about maybe an inch or so behind the iron, the tip of the iron, and I'm looking at what the solder does. And so I'm watching, if it's nice and rounded, then I'm thinking to myself, yep, I'm adding just enough solder. If I see it like get kind of blobby, I'm like, oh, I'm adding too much, and I slow down, and I slow down adding solder to it. Or if I see it starting to flatten out, I will add a little bit more, right?
Does that have to do with the speed you're putting?
Yeah, some of it is speed. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So again, and that's, you know, for a lot of people, it's comfort level, right? I mean, it's just kind of what you get used to. I did this one flat just for the fun of it, right? So I mean, it's not horribly flat, but I know sometimes, especially on the camera, it's hard to see with the light in here, and then you get these. I mean, this is already shiny. It's hard to see the reflections, but. So let me just do this one again real quick. So, I know the one question I get asked all the time is, you know, which direction do I solder, right? So you'll notice I'm feeding the solder into the flat part of the iron. I'm right-handed, so I always hold the iron in my right hand, and I always hold the solder in my left hand. But sometimes, you know, like this one, I could solder from here, going in this direction, and then sometimes I'll start from this direction and go this way. I don't think I have any real reason why I do that.
Do you leave the solder on the iron, or
Yeah.
something like that?
Yeah. I'm making a decision about, do I need to add solder? Do I have to put some there? And then also, you know, so you've noticed, I mean, I put a little solder there, then I put solder here. And I pulled the iron away when I still had about that much more to go, because I know the solder follows the iron for a little ways. That's why I said I always look a little behind the iron, because that gives me a better indicator of what I'm really doing, right? If you're watching right at the tip of the iron, you're probably going to end up with too much, which is most people's issue, right? You'll end up with probably too much solder somewhere, or you'll just keep dragging all that solder with you, and then when you go to end, you leave a blob of solder because it all was following you as you were going, right? So do you see that? That's not bad. So that's not too bad, right? I sort of know what I'm doing.
So I've heard that you flip it over and do the other side, do you?
Yeah, so I always say that we solder 3 sides to a panel, right? So you solder the front, you would flip it over, we would solder the back, and then you flip it back over, and more than likely, you probably have to touch up the front somewhere, right? There's probably something, either you got like the solder bled through, or maybe you notice something that bugs you that you didn't notice before, like, oh, I didn't like how that little joint looks, or something. Yeah, not quite smooth, right? I mean, you know, I'm horrible, because I would just come back in and just, like, always try to make that look better, right? I tell people that there's a curse to soldering, and the curse is just this. The curse is you think you can always make it look better, right? So there comes a point where you just kind of say, that's good enough, and just kind of walk away from it, right?
Deborah, go ahead. Deborah's asking, what angle is the soldering iron on the glass?
It's about a 12-degree angle. I have no idea. I made that up. So the problem is when you ask me a question, I come up with an answer. Right? So I'm not really sure, but I am really, like, let me do this, see if I can do this.
Parallel to the.
Yeah, I am really, really close, right? I'm going to do this big long one because it'll just be easier. Let me just make sure there's some flux on there. Again, I haven't dipped back into the flux at all, right? There's enough on the brush. So I'm going to come in here, and as somebody asked me about earlier, the iron is on the glass this whole time. Right? I slow down a little bit when I come to one of those little solder balls when I was tack soldering, and then that's it, right? The other thing is, you see I didn't pull straight up. I don't pull straight up when I leave the seam. It'll sometimes leave a little peak. I always pull off to the side, which this one left a little mark, which doesn't always, but I'm going to put zinc on. I'm going to have to touch that up anyway. So right now I don't worry about it, right? I mean,
But if you don't, what do you do?
what if I don't? Oh, if I didn't do anything, this is what I would do. So anytime you need to resolder back into something, like let's say, like I have this little tail sticking here for some reason, flux it, right? Because flux, again, helps the solder to flow a little easier. And then I don't need to add solder, right? Because I got plenty of solder. So I'm just going to go in and heat it and just pull in, and then pull off. And yeah, do you see how it just cleaned up that little bit? But you also notice I didn't just try to fix just that spot. I kind of moved a little bit let the solder get fluid so it looks smoother, right? So, I know. I make two things I've been told look really super easy. One is cutting glass. The other is soldering. I make soldering look easy. Sorry.
You mentioned when you do the backside sometimes, or well, when you do the front, it leaks onto the back.
Yeah.
So what does that
Yeah.
look like, or what is?
Oh, what does it look like?
How does that happen?
Let's see if we can get one. So I had a little gap here. It wasn't real big, but I'm seeing if I can maybe get this to like come through. So you run a risk of sticking around too long with a soldering iron, right? I mean, I don't want to crack the glass. I mean, people, I'm sure I've done it. Crack glass before because you're hanging around too long. It goes back to that curse of soldering, right? Where I was mentioning before that you think you can fix it, so you keep sticking around and trying to fix it, and all you do is get it hotter and hotter. You run the risk of cracking the glass, or again, if you have gaps, you run the risk of the solder bleeding to the backside. I have a real simple rule, is that if you can touch it with your finger, then you can solder back into it, right? If it's too hot to touch, then you shouldn't be soldering back into it.
So let it sit.
Yeah, let it sit, right? But, we're all impatient, right? So we're like, I got to make that look better. So we just keep trying to fix it. But more than likely, you probably have some other area that you have to work on anyways, right? So let that cool, come back. Did I get that to come through? No, I didn't really. It sort of did. Did you see it? I mean, the gap wasn't that big, but do you see the solder that's there? That's actually what came from the other side, and it hit the table, and so it couldn't really pull out too much because the glass is really pretty flat. But if it was a big glob, I would have. Well, yeah, if I was doing the backside, let me just do this as a kind of a visual, right? So let's say it looked like that, right? Let's say, or even worse than that. Let's say it looked like that. Yeah, let's say it looked like that, right? That I don't really care, right? I mean, I got solder, and I need to solder this, so there's some solder. I would flux, right, because we always flux, and this time I did grab a little more flux because I figure at this point I'm probably using all the flux on my brush. Then I would come in, and at this point, all I'm going to do is reheat this up. I'm going to pull it where I need some solder over there. I'm going to pull this one back over here, and now I'm going to add some solder because I'm starting to use it all up, right? And then try to do this seam. Right.
Jamie's asking, do you concentrate on making both sides look perfect, or do you just focus on the front of the piece? Sometimes my copper foil is not even on both sides.
That's a great question, Jamie. I'm trying to make it all look just perfect. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I know. I've heard that before. Sometimes I know lots of people that will only flat solder the backside because they're like, well, who's going to look at it, right? I mean, who's going to see it? But, I have this weird thing. I think, well, it's a window, right? Yeah. So it's hanging up, and people could probably view it from both sides, potentially. Right, unless it's on a third floor of a building or something, and then so I just try to make both sides look good. So yeah, I know you'll probably find that one side does look better, and I don't know if it's just because you're in a groove. I notice a lot of times the back sides look better, and I think it's probably just because you soldered all this, and then you kind of got into a groove, and then now you're soldering the back side, and so you know what you're doing, and it looks better. So
I've heard people trim off the extra foil if they messed up too with like an X-Acto knife.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So sometimes one of the issues with like overlapping too is sometimes you don't line them up perfectly, and you might not notice it till you solder. You could just or if you notice it beforehand, you could trim it. Definitely. Or people do it sometimes with like uneven glass, right? So we talked about some that have textures on them. So if you put like a foil over a textured glass, your foil is going to look wider in some spots and narrower than others, right? And so it's possible people would come in and trim them down. I know lamp makers trim their foil all the time because sometimes their pieces are about like that big. Sure. And then so it's easier to do a wider foil, right? So you just put the wider foil on and just go back in and trim it. That's a lot easier than trying to put a really skinny foil on a little tiny piece of glass. I know that from personal experience.
Like your reason for even doing this, if you're doing it to make money, then you can't afford to have sloppy work. Yeah.
Sure,
that's
right?
You as an artist.
You got it.
Your reputation.
That's a great point. That's a wonderful point. Yeah, I agree with you. Right? I mean, it is. I tell people this all the time about stained glass, and if those of you that have been doing it, it's time consuming, right? I mean, it takes time. So make good decisions, right? Make good decisions about the glass. Take your time. Try to make the solder look nice because in the long run, it's going to be totally worth it, right? That you took the couple extra minutes to, hand select your glass and pick some good stuff. I still tell people, for me, I think glass selection is probably the most important process of stained glass, right? That's it, right? Because that's all you're going to see. Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, when it hangs up, only other stained glass people walk up and go, oh, there's a little lump in the center there. Nobody else does. So, anyways, let's pretend I finished this whole thing. I would put some zinc on it. This is a zinc channel, right? And it would just slide on there like this. And again, I'm probably not going to do it. but I would just solder. Then I would take this joint and I would just solder up to there to attach it. And again, if you look at this panel real quick, you can see how that was done, right? So these are soldered, and they go right up to the cane and just grab the face of the cane a tiny bit, and then that's what holds it on. So, right. And then I would clean this off, right, everybody? So we would use one of the cleaners. I showed you this spray-on one, which was nice. This is another one, more traditional flux remover. And again, I feel like I'm always just trying to pitch products, but the flux cleaners are worth it. I mean, they definitely are worth the money because they will neutralize the acid that's in the flux, which, again, dish soap doesn't do that. And I know a lot of people use dish soap to clean their pieces, but you're not really getting rid of the flux. Your piece will look clean, but all the seams will start to oxidize over time. So this will kind of prevent that. The very last thing we do is we wax them, right? We use something called a finishing compound, which I didn't bring in a bottle of that because I forgot. And I would wax the whole thing, but so.
So we used car polish.
Yeah.
Is that a thing?
That's it. Yeah.
Okay.
The car polish. Yep. Really like a carnauba wax is what they call it. So those work better than like the like nowadays they have these synthetic waxes that you use to wax your car with. Those don't work so great. So you want the more traditional wax,
Sorry, what is it called?
Carnauba. Yeah. Or you could just buy a product from us. That's
from where?
from that's Delphi, DELPHI.
Deborah's asking, you would just take your solder joints right up to the sun and model really over it? I guess I'm not following Deborah.
Here, I'm going to show you.
Yep.
This is pretend that I had 4 pieces on here, right? Which I don't. But this is exactly what I would do. Let me do this so that it doesn't, just so I don't bump it and it goes somewhere I don't want it to go.
Do you rely on those a lot for like straight edges?
These things?
Yeah.
I mean well, this is the zinc.
Sorry, no.
Oh, zinc. Okay.
Yes. I mean these things.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry.
These are a great investment,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if you do anything that has straight lines or
Thank you,
straight
Deborah.
edges.
I'm following you now.
Is that what she's
Yep,
asking?
that's exactly what she's asking, right up to the zinc.
Yep, let me show you. Let me hit this with it. See, I don't know if you guys can see. See this little circle here? That's a bleed through from the backside again. So when I was, I did that big glob and I came back. So it was too hot, but I was, wanted to show you guys what I was doing. And so this is what happens when the solder's too hot. You just keep chasing that back and forth. So now I'd have to touch that up again because
I also
I was
noticed like when
impatient.
it's you were saying like the flat instead of the beading, that comes through more often than.
Yep. Yeah.
Right.
It certainly does.
Because it's just hotter solder, right?
Yep. So I'm going to come in. I'm adding a little bit of solder. I'm trying to fix that little glob I had. Adding a tiny bit of solder. I'm coming to the cane, and you see me tip the iron up, and that's it. So I don't believe in putting a big glob of solder up on the face of the cane because I just think it's obtrusive. I think it's kind of gets in the way. So all you need to really do. So if this is the cane, you just want to solder up and touch it, right? And what I did was this, and I picked the iron up like this a little bit, which pulls the solder towards the zinc, and then I can see it grab the zinc, and then as soon as I see it grab, I just take it away.
And Tammy is asking, do you wax before patina?
No, you would patina and then wax. If you put a wax on it, you won't be able to patina it, right? Because you'll have this coating on the solder. But
Do you clean it first, then patina, then wax?
yeah,
Or do you clean it after patina? No.
you clean the flux. So always think about neutralizing the flux, right? That's a really important part. So you would do that as soon as you're done soldering, right? So make the panel nice and clean, and then you would apply a patina. And then after the patina would be finishing compound, or the wax is the very last thing. So no matter, always think of it as the very last thing you're going to do is wax
You
it.
don't have to clean off the extra patina at all?
You need to rinse it off,
Rinse it,
right?
oh,
So,
okay.
but not necessarily use a cleaner. You don't have to use a cleaner
Oh, okay.
necessarily. You just have to rinse it off because what you're doing is patinas are a chemical that react with the metals, right? And so you want to rinse that off to stop that reaction. So that's why you rinse them off. But yeah. So you can see I soldered that on, right? Look at that. This is a lovely panel. Look at that. People should. Ooh. Maybe I'll give it to Daisy for Christmas.
Just what she wanted.
Damn, the surprise is ruined.
Don't be surprised. That's right. Why did I say that out loud?
Before we move on to Daisy, real quick, Michelle's asking, my patina comes off when when it was on the zinc. When I wax the zinc. Any suggestions?
Yeah. So on the zinc, so the patina, are you using the patina for zinc? There's a black patina just for zinc, which works better than just the black patina for solder. But I can tell you it's a common problem. Patinas don't really like the zinc. So one of the issues is it could be the zinc isn't clean enough. A lot of the zinc, the cane that comes to us, from the factory, is a little oily sometimes because I think they do that on purpose. I think it's just part of the manufacturing process. Yeah, so you could try cleaning your zinc beforehand. Even I use like Dawn dish soap because it's a degreaser. Sometimes people use a steel wool on the zinc before you patina, and then use the patina. That the patina tends to grab it better that way, if that makes sense. And then
You also wait too.
I
to
wait.
wax.
Yeah, I always wait to wax. So if you're waxing with patina, with black patina, I always wait to wax it, just to let the patina really kind of bite into the metal a little bit. So I like a day, even overnight, I say, but. Yeah. Good questions, though. Thanks for everyone asking questions. That was great. Sorry, that part took a little bit longer than Daisy and I were thinking. It was exactly the...
But it's what everybody wants to know.
I know. Good. Well, I'm glad we got them answered. Thanks.
Well, it's everything to know to do this next part, right?
Good.
Yeah, so Daisy's going to talk to you about some great stuff.
Yeah. So if you are a fusing artist and you want to get into stained glass and kind of combine the two, you can. Or if you are a stained glass artist and you want to jump into fusing a little bit, but not just abandon what you were doing before, you can do that. So here I've got an example of a stained glass panel that we saw earlier. But these bees and the flower and everything is something called glass enamel. So it's basically a like ground up glass mixed with like a medium, like water or whatever, to make it kind of liquidy. So this is very much like paint, and you can treat it like paint.
Tammy, to answer your question, we will be live twice in December. We're going to be doing a holiday stained glass project as well as a holiday fusing project. But then typically we go live every other week.
All right.
Can you use other types of paint for glass or no?
So there are people that use acrylic paint, and I mean it's just on there. There's not really a way to like make it permanent on there. So if you don't have a kiln and you want to still kind of do something like this, you could absolutely paint on there. You could probably try putting like a clear coat on that might hold it on a little bit better. But this is permanent. I can, scratch this and it will not come off. So we have a couple different types of glass enamels. I prefer this brand. I couldn't tell you why, I just do. This is Glass Line Enamels. We also carry some called Thompson Enamel.
And Milton Bridge.
And Milton Bridge is the other
Milton
name.
Bridge. And we have a Bullseye color line as well, and we just started carrying a lot of new colors. So those are definitely worth a try if you ever
There's
have
Glass
been
Line, Thompson,
interested.
Bullseye, and what?
Milton Bridge.
Milton Bridge, yep. So we have these handy dandy tips that go right on these bottles. There are 3 different sizes. I don't know if you can see. There's a small, medium, and a large. So that you can squeeze it out right from the bottle, and you can kind of, depending on what you're doing, if you're filling in a large space or you're doing like little details, you can use different tips to get what you want. So I have the smallest tip on this black enamel bottle, and while Roy was talking, I just put these little dots here. You can see that. So the reason I put those dots is because I have this fancy ornament template. This, I just found some simple Christmas drawings and I printed it out, and I can alter this however I want. I don't have to follow it or anything. But I can
Do those tips
just
work
easily.
on like any of the paints that you have?
They can. The different brands do have other tips that fit specifically on the bottles. We also carry, they're just small, empty squeeze bottles. So what you can do with these, that's actually kind of cool, you can mix them. So you can create your own colors just like normal paint, but you can fire them to make them permanent. So I actually have that here. So this is purple. It comes in the bottle as purple. But if I didn't have access to that color, that particular color, I could always take this red and blue and I could mix them together, and it kind of takes some trial and error, but I can eventually mix it to a nice purple. So what I did with this is I actually just dipped my brush into a little bit of water, and it kind of helps with mixing it a little bit easier.
Does hard water affect like the cleaning or the paint or like any of the? I don't even know.
Good question.
That is a good question.
We haven't noticed it here too.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I've seen people using like jugs of like distilled water.
Yeah, I mean, if you have really hard water, I mean, I would think it would be a little bit better to use something that you know isn't. But yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't used these in a place where that's an issue. So I can adjust my custom color however I want by just adding a little bit more. I could add a little bit of white to lighten it up. And then I can just use this and paint right on here, just like I paint. So when you are using a brush, you might have to build it up a little bit. So I don't know if you can see, I'll lift this up in just a minute here. This is going on kind of thin, but I can see where it is. And the nice thing with it being thin, it's going to dry pretty quickly. So you can see that's kind of thin there. But once this dries, I can go back in and I can kind of build it up a little bit because I know where I need to put it.
How long does it usually take to dry?
Not very long. So while Roy was finishing up, I just used brush and this little R here, and that is already dry. So you can tell that it's dry because it kind of gets this this matte finish on top of it. So I do have these cute little things here that one of our other store employees made, Izzy, and she's been working on these for a couple days, and they're really cute. But this little pine tree, she used the dark green, so you can see how it kind of is a lighter color, but if I squeeze that out, you can see how dark it starts out as.
Nancy's got a question for you. Do you have to use a kiln for the enamel paint, or could you use your oven?
For these, you do have to use a kiln. We do sell some that are meant to be baked in your oven.
Those are our PBO paints.
Yep, PBO paints. They are a little bit more transparent, but they do absolutely work. I've played around with them a little bit. And you do have to build those up a little bit more to get kind of an even coat. Yep.
Okay, but those also have tips?
They don't.
They don't, nope. So
They're
we,
in a traditional, like a paint jar.
yeah, they're in a couple different ways. We have them in little like paint pots.
Okay.
We have them in marker form, and then there's these little things called outliners. So it's kind of like a little bit of a thicker consistency in a little tube, almost like these, but a little bit thinner. So you can use those to kind of do some lettering if you want. But those you do bake in the oven, and nice and simple. So, yeah. If you don't want to, spend money on a kiln right away, then those are a good option to kind of mess around with painting on glass and getting it to stay. All right, so I'm going to take this black with this teeny tiny tip here, and I'm just going to quickly go down the line of one of these other ornaments. So all I'm doing is I'm not squeezing very much, just a teeny tiny amount. I'm just putting that tip right on the glass, squeezing out the amount, and lifting it up.
So I don't want to jump in, but I'm going to. So you can adjust the consistency, right, of the
Yes.
any of the enamels, but
Yep.
these in particular, right?
Yeah, so these ones you can actually open this right up. You can take this whole thing off, and you can see that, you know, it's kind of liquidy in there. You can see the water that was put in there. You can put a little bit of water in here and kind of make it thinner if you want. You can actually reconstitute these. So say you've had a bottle of this black sitting on your shelf and you used it a couple times, and then a year later you're like, I want to try that again, but it's really dry. So if you just open it up, put a little bit of water in there, and just let it sit probably overnight, in the morning you will be able to shake it, and it'll sound like that. So you'll be able to kind of move it around and
Bring it back to life.
yeah. And I've done that several times here.
Yeah.
They sit for a while and but we rarely throw them away because we can always reuse them. If you really need to use it right then and there, you can always grab a little dish or something like that, and you can kind of scrape it out, put a little bit of water in there, and it might, work a little bit faster.
Joanne, it's PBO paint that we use for the oven.
Yes.
Yeah, and the biggest difference, I don't know if you said, sorry, I was listening to every word you were saying, but I might have missed a couple things, is that, the PBO is not as permanent, right? I mean, that's the slight disadvantage to this technique, but.
Yeah, so once you bake the PBO paint in the oven, and so it's on your glass, I mean, it's pretty much like this, where you can scratch it, and it's not going to come off, but it's going to take a little more to get it to look as nice as this might.
Before you move on real quick, Michelle is asking, can you talk about the temperatures needed for oven versus kiln?
Ooh.
Very different.
Okay. I believe the PBO paints are 325 for 40 minutes. That is on the package, though, so if you do buy them, the instructions are there.
Yeah, it is 3 something. I know that.
It is 3
Yes.
something. I thought 350 came to mind for me, too.
Yeah, it's around there, but just double check on the package because it is on there, and they're super easy to use and follow, and just, yeah. As for these, it is also on the back of the bottle here. Most of these glass line will say that they mature at 1500 degrees, so that's why you need a kiln. But I can tell you that I usually take them to 1450. I have taken them as low as probably about 1300 and they still are permanent on the glass. The only thing that changing the top temperature does is it changes the texture of the paint in the end result. So if you take it hotter, it's going to be a lot smoother. If you take it lower, it's going to keep whatever texture you have. So if you have like a really chunky one that you just can't get it to smooth out or anything like that, and you can see that it's chunky on there, it's probably going to keep some of that texture if you don't take it as hot. I do have some examples of that elsewhere, but on this panel, you can kind of see it. In this beehive, it kind of worked in my favor. But it was kind of, I don't know if this was maybe an older paint and it was just having a hard time getting smooth, but it kind of kept this chunky texture, whereas all the rest of these are really smooth.
So you bake that at a lower temp?
All these were done at the same temperature. I do not remember what it was since it was a few years ago.
Do you paint before you solder?
Yes.
Okay.
So these hexagons here with the paint, those have been fired in a kiln. So it's kind of hard to tell, but you see how that's kind of rounded there? That's because it was fired in a kiln. So when you fire things, it it wants to round out the edges and get nice and not sharp, which can help when you're putting foil on there. I've played around a lot with putting fused pieces into stained glass panels. If you ever visit out in the store, right behind the counter, there's a sunflower, and that center is fused, and the petals are all.
We have shown that on Instagram and Facebook.
Yeah, there's pictures of it, so I'm sure you can
And
find
there's a
it.
free pattern guide, I do believe, on our website for it.
Yeah, we made that.
Okay, so we've got a couple questions coming in. So Michelle is asking, do you need to have 90 or 96 to paint on? Won't it crack the glass in the hot kiln?
Good question. The COE, so the 90 or 96 numbers that we're talking about, with these and all the other enamels do not matter. So with those PVO paints, how Roy had some of that window glass, you could put those on there. It does not matter.
But to put it in the kiln,
Yep, you would want 90 or 96, but it doesn't. These aren't specific to either of those.
but to make sure you've got a firing temperature and that the glass would be reliable, that would be why you would want a COE versus
Right.
just painting
Yeah.
on your normal stained glass
Right.
and putting that in your kiln.
Right. So I could put this on stained glass and put it in a kiln, but I might not like what the glass itself does. This might stick to it and be totally fine, but I don't know what that stained glass without a COE assigned to it, I don't know what that's going to do. It could get really matte, it could crack, it could do all sorts of stuff.
It's not tested for that use.
Yeah.
So in 90 and 96, that's like the type of glass? What is
That's fusible
Yeah,
glass.
so it's the rate at which it expands and contracts with heat. So when it says that it's like tested compatible with 90 or 96, that's just the rate that it expands and contracts. So they seem like they're really close, but they're not close enough. So if you're using 90, you just want to stick with 90. So if I were to, take this piece out and say I painted this on 90 and now I want to stick this to a plate, I need to make sure that whatever glass I'm using for that plate is also 90. So it's matching the COE of this glass. So, but that's fusing. We're not talking about that.
Okay, a couple more questions though. Would these work in the little microwave kiln?
Ooh.
I don't think I've tried that.
They should. I mean, it's about temperature. So
Yeah.
the tricky part would just be trying to watch it close enough so you could get it
Yeah.
at the right temperature. But sure, I mean, I don't see why not.
You
I
could
don't
definitely
see why
try
not.
it, and
Yeah.
if it works, great. If not, then
Try again.
yeah, try
Yeah, I
again.
mean, the only thing is you're going to, the risk you run into often with the microwave kilns is they run a little bit hot, so you might over-fire them a bit, but, like I said, once you get kind of a feel for, the microwave kilns work on time, right? So you can't tell it what temperature to do. So you would just back off the time, whatever you took, right? So if you took, 5 minutes, and next time do it at 4 minutes or whatever, so.
Sierra's
does
asking,
say
do they need to cure for so many hours before firing? Sorry if it was already discussed. Can these be baked? So these ones cannot be baked. And do they need to cure?
As far as curing before you fire them, the only thing that you really want to have happen is you want them to be completely dry. That way you're going to have a more consistent firing. So say I painted this whole tree and, around the edges is super dry, but this middle is really wet, and I just throw it in the kiln, turn it on, and let it go. It'll probably turn out fine, but I want to make sure that it turns out exactly how I want it. So I'm
take the
gonna
time.
let that sit for maybe half an hour to an hour, and it's probably going to be totally dry. But what you're looking for is this whole thing to be like this matte, almost satiny finish. You can kind of see in my dish here that it's starting to dry. So that really light purple, that stuff is dry. And all this dark purple is not.
Okay, and last question I've got on here. What do you do if your metal tips get clogged?
Ooh,
That's a great question.
that's something I have to deal with a lot here. So there's a couple things you can do. What I like to do is, I got some water in this little cup here, and I've got this tip here. I don't know if you can see inside that. Somebody didn't clean it out.
I'm trying to see it a little bit.
Yeah.
Probably wasn't me. I'm sure it wasn't me.
It's
She meant me.
this person used pink. I can tell that because it's pink. So I like to clean them out as soon as I take them off the bottles, especially if I'm switching colors, but it also saves time later. So what I am going to do with this tip, as soon as we're done with this, I'm going to go and I'm going to run water through this. These packs of tips come with these little pins. Very hard to see. And this pin fits right inside of that. So you see it kind of come through the end of that, and it's covered in black paint. So that is making sure that the tip, the hole that's in there, is clear of anything that is dried, which with these smaller tips is very likely that it's going to dry every couple minutes if you're not constantly using it. So it's always good to have one of these pins on hand just to kind of stick it through there, clear it, whatever you need to do. But if it's dried like this, like it was probably used a week ago and nobody cleaned it out, I'm just going to put some water in a cup and drop it right in there and let it sit. I've used alcohol, I've used water. It doesn't really matter as long as it gets it wet. So like I said, you can reconstitute these. So that's basically what's happening in there. And every so often I might give it a swirl and just kind of keep going back to it. You can also use these pins to kind of scrape out the dry stuff while you're running it under water. But however you need to clean it out. Q-tips fit really well in there too. So whatever works.
All right, painting on glass.
God, that was good. That was really good.
Oh,
What else? I got one comment real quick, but
I have one more thing too.
oh, you go ahead then.
All right. So if you see this R, it's not like the smoothest lines. You can also take those little pins that come with it. And once it's dry, I can scrape this off to clean up my lines. So I can straighten out all of that. It's really nice for when you have lettering that you're doing. I've done quite a bit of lettering here. And I just kind of get it on there and clean it up later. So there's
I didn't know that's how you.
there.
I thought you just got them that perfect. I was like, wow, Daisy is so great at this.
not that good.
You just.
Do you have specific brushes you use for lettering?
I actually don't use brushes for lettering. I tend to use the really tiny tips. So like these dots, they're real small. I can keep them small. And with lettering, if you're moving and say you print something off of Word and you're just tracing it. I've done that plenty of times. I mean, you're just getting it where it needs to be and you're cleaning it up later. Yep.
There we go. Great.
So,
Oh, I was just going to comment on that I think, especially going from a stained glass point of view, is that one of the nice things about painting is a great way of adding all this detail and or personalizing something that is really would be hard to do in glass. I mean, there's no way you're going to cut out these little tiny V shapes and stuff, right? I mean, that to me is why I always think it's a nice way of kind of incorporating it. Sometimes it's as simple as like adding eyeballs to something, or which I might talk about later. Right, is just trying to add some detail to something that you find a challenge to do in cut glass, right? So, what fun.
I know I mentioned mixing the colors earlier, but here you can see I kind of used it to my advantage and kind of blended them together a little bit to enhance what I was painting. So it makes it look more like a flower and it's not just solid colors.
Nice. That was great. Good job.
Well,
okay, what
do you
now?
have
I said I was going to talk about patterns, right? So, hey, I wanted to talk about patterns real quick a little bit. In particular, I know it's more of a challenge for us. For people to find patterns, because there used to be, like I said, I've been doing this a while, and there used to be all kinds of stained glass books. I mean, you could buy books on anything. And then nowadays, there's not as many books out there. I know there's some free patterns online you can find, but sometimes maybe you're trying to find something that's a little more unique or try to do something. So I'm going to show a couple examples of using some simple clip art. and how you can turn clip art into like a stained glass pattern. And so this was, I mean, this one literally was something I just printed offline, right? I mean, found this silly looking fish, printed it off. I put the square or the rectangle around it because I could just do it as a suncatcher, right, where it had an irregular outside edge, but I'm thinking of it more of like a panel and how I would incorporate that into a panel. So that was the original picture, and then I did. Oh, I showed this drawing here. I don't. Can you guys see the pencil lines all right on there? Is that? Mm-hmm. So what I'm trying to show here is that you have to. So we're talking about break lines, and what break lines are about is like cutting pieces of glass out. Because obviously, I mean, I can't cut this whole piece of glass around the thing. Maybe if I use some fancy saw, I could, but doing it by hand would be near impossible. So you have to have break lines, and break lines are almost always at the end of points. So where the fins are at, that's a great place to put a break line. Somewhere in this big curve, I probably have to have a break line in there, so you can see I put a couple in there, I think.
Why don't you go all the way to the corners with the lines?
With the
The break lines?
Like this one, the top one.
like this one?
Yeah,
Oh,
like,
why didn't I go in the corner?
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's. I'm probably wrong, but I think it's stronger. So, and I also think it's a little more visually distracting when it's right in the corner because your eye is drawn to that, right? So that's the whole thing about break lines is trying to make them not so distracting, right? So I don't know if you can see here. In fact, I'll draw on here real quick, and I'm just going to do it with a marker, but. I've seen this before where people put a break line right here, right, which kind of makes sense, right? I mean, you could put one right where the mouth is at, right? So I could have put a break line there, but then it lines up perfectly with the mouth, which then is distracting because you think, does he have a stick coming out of his mouth, or did he, is that the fishing line that he swallowed or something, right? So to me, I know, like when I'm trying to create a design, it's always trying to hide the break lines. Did you have a question?
Well, I was just going to make a comment that when you said you're not coming out from the corners, that's to your advantage because your glass is square. So if you can butt it up to a corner, you're actually saving glass by using that.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, I never thought of it that way. That's exactly what I was doing. I'm trying to save glass, which is what I'm always thinking about. But you can't work here at a glass place. I got more glass. So here's another interpretation of that fish, right? So here's another way of doing that with break lines. And so they're still break lines, but they become part of the design, right? So here you could think of these as, the movement of water. I mean, that's what I always try to do, incorporate when I'm thinking of doing, especially something that's, from nature, is how can you make the break lines look like they're not break lines, right? So, you can see I catch here, I'm catching, I've told you before, on the points, there needs to be a break line connecting somewhere, so I just connect them and then make this kind of nice gentle waving line. I didn't put one so it doesn't look like he's eating a stick or something. I tried to hide them down here on the bottom too, or we got to catch those, so why not just have that kind of nice gentle curving line and catch those? Then I have so if you're looking at this, if you're looking at the face of the fish, we couldn't cut that mouth, right? You could do a wire overlay, right? Actually, I just thought of that a second ago. That would be pretty nice, right? Just put a piece of wire there, and there's his mouth, and then instead of having to cut the glass. But if you were cutting the glass, you could. I have another one where I show where I'm kind of disguising. I'm disguising the mouth. So I put this like little cheek in there, right? So now I would score the glass so you can see that this would be a piece, that would be a piece, and then the cheek would be a third piece. So another way of trying to create that kind of same smile look, but not have to do a wire overlay or something along that line. I also drew some lines in here where I was trying to cut the body up into scales, right? Which also could be wire overlays or copper foil overlay. I don't know if you guys have seen, you could lay a sheet of copper on there with an X-Acto knife, come back in and cut the design out. I know it's really tricky. We had this wonderful instructor here in the early summer, Margot Marquette, her name is, that came here to teach, and she teaches this copper foil overlay system that is the most complicated I've ever seen. They're just gorgeous pieces of work. And they're incredible. But she was teaching people how to do it, and they all the students thought it was easy. But you could, right? That's another way of getting design in something. But
how do you affix the wire?
The wire, yeah. So if we go back to this piece, right, and if I show you, so let's pretend this is wire. You just solder it right there. Right? So you're right, the wire has to have a contact point somewhere. So this would be a solder seam, right? Because more than likely that's separate glass from this one. So I already have some solder there. I would just bend this, maybe put a little solder glob there so that it kind of look like a little cuter than it looks, and then just attach it right there with just a little dab of solder.
So that other end of the smile would just kind of be free.
Yeah, it would just be sitting on the glass, right? I mean, it would, for the most part, those hold up really quite well as long as it's something that's just hanging up in a window, right, and that no one's really touching it. Usually on wire overlays, it's one of the last things that you would do. So you would, solder all this, clean it, right? Really important, clean it really, really well with a flux remover. I would even wax it at that point, and then come in and then just, because all you're going to solder is right there, and just tack solder it, clean that little bit of area, wax that tiny bit of area, and then you're done. The reason why you do that is, I don't know, from personal experience, I've done lots of wire overlay stuff. And if you wax it at the very end, it's so hard to clean the wax. The wax gets caught in here or under the glass, and then when you're trying to clean that wax out, you end up bending the wire. So it's really best to do that last. I mean, this part of the fin could also be wire, right? I mean, instead of cutting 4 little pieces, I could just cut one big triangle and then lay wire over it to create that look.
Susan's asking, what kind of wire do you use?
No, so we're using copper wire.
For the overlay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't bring any. I was trying to think if I had any in here. I don't think I have any in the room. So it's copper wire. So surprisingly, Delphi sells some. We sell some in different gauges, right? So different thicknesses, but we also sell what's called tinned copper wire or pre-tinned copper wire, and so it's already silver. It already has a little bit of solder on it, and that is the best thing to use because then, if we're looking at the fish smiling, you really only have to solder at this point right here, and the whole thing would stay silver like everything else is already, like your solder already is.
What if you're patinaing?
Yeah, if you're patinaing, and so that's a good question because if you're using the pre-tinned copper, you actually have to solder back over the copper wire because the tin that's on there won't accept the patina. You need to have lead in the solder, right? So you would just tin the wire, which is, again, fluxing it and then just adding a little bit of solder and basically so in those cases, I usually just use copper wire if I know I'm going to patina because I have to tin it anyways, right? You have to turn the copper to silver with the solder, then you can patina it. Does that make sense?
That's interesting because I put patina on that pre-tin wire and it's working.
And it's worked?
Oh,
Isn't that
really?
interesting? Well, that's the thing about the tin is sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. So I'm not sure what that is. I don't know if it's maybe it's the vibrancy of the patina, maybe. Well, meaning if it's a newer patina, it probably works better. Yeah, I'm not sure, but I know from personally in my experience.
So with the regular copper, you can patina it black, or if you want it.
Just a regular copper?
Yeah.
You could
said-
discolor it, but you wouldn't be able to turn it black. You'd have to tin it first, which means you'd have to cover it with a super thin layer of solder.
Okay, which
and then,
you would have to. Okay.
So now you mentioned to put a little glob at the very end where his smile is. You're working directly on the glass at that point. So remember,
not necessarily. I could do the wire like on this board, like on the home sew board. I could bend it the way I wanted to, and just set a glob of solder on that end, and pick it up, and then take it over, and then just tack solder at where the mouth is at.
Okay, but what I'm saying is you're tack soldering that one right there, and that's on the glass. You tack.
It's not going to stick to the glass.
Well, that's what my question was.
So it won't stick to the glass. It'll just stick to the wire.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Is that? So I have another one here that just wanted to show you guys. Also, this is sea turtle, right? So that's kind of fun. And same deal. So there's plenty of ways of breaking it up. Again, let me show you this one again, so you guys can see that. Again, all these fins and the tail, so they all have some kind of a point or an end to them that needs a break line somewhere. So just how you approach it, I guess, is totally up to you. I've had, here's one way, I think I might have done this one where, again, since it's a sea turtle and you can make lines that kind of look like the flow of water and you can catch, the various tips, and then that can be your break line for you. The turtle itself is actually, if you look at how complicated the design is in the middle, but you could do that. That wouldn't be impossible to cut all those little tiny pieces at all. These shapes actually are pretty easy to do. So a lot of times you'll be surprised when you're looking at clip art that sometimes the designs are not really all as complicated as you think they are. At first you look at them and you go, sometimes you need to attach a line somewhere else, right? So you can cut it Here's another. Oh, this is is this what I was showing?
That's a different one.
Is this a totally different one? Okay, 'cause that's what I thought.
This was
You see
Val's,
this
I
one?
think.
Yeah, Val did this one, and then she's doing seaweed. Do you see the the seaweed coming up, and then so that she's using all those flowing lines again to catch all the points that that need a break line, right? So the whole point is trying to disguise them, right, or hide them. That's I think how you want to kind of approach that if you can. I was just for the fun, I printed these off real quick. I'm not going to go over them like super crazy, but I just wanted to show you a few things just to kind of, again, to reiterate the point. So here I got these Santa faces, and I would just use these as a, probably more as a sun catcher. I mean, you could do them as obviously as a panel, but this one is almost, you probably don't have to do hardly anything to this one for the most part, right? I mean, the nose and even the beard, I mean, there's some tricky stuff going on here, but not horrible. Obviously, the eyebrows are, you could just cut the glass and glue them to the glass. People do that, right? Nobody says everything has to be soldered on. But the other thing you could do is move the eyebrows up so they're into more of the hat, so they tie into the hat. So then you don't have that space. The eyes are always going to be tricky. They're always a challenge. The best thing to do is usually just do like Daisy does and paint them, right? That's what Daisy just showed you all that painting. That's the best way to do eyeballs.
Can you cut into like those sharp corner thing or like
Which ones where?
like inside with the beard or whatever?
Yeah. Oh,
like how do you?
I couldn't do that. You're asking about like
just cutting the like. Yeah, how
you're talking about, so if we're looking at this, sorry,
yeah,
this
like,
white part of the beard, like this is a really deep inside curve. Is that what you're asking me?
No, so it's like these parts right here.
Oh, this little part here?
Like here.
Oh,
here.
Yeah.
You can do that.
Sure.
But it's like, it'd be hard to
grind. In reality.
Good option for a saw.
You're right. In reality, it's probably more like this, right? So I'm going to redraw on top of it because this is how I normally do this.
Okay, yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Right? Do you see how I softened all those?
Rounder.
Really, that's probably what it would be, right? Okay. So that's just normally what I would do. Is I always come in and I look at all the trouble areas. Like even this one is a little bit of a deep inside curve. So I would just do this instead, right? Just make that come like this, right? Make that part of the beard just a little wider, so I don't have such of a tricky of a cut to make. What else is there? I saw something else in here. I thought
I'd make the mustache 2 pieces.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You would definitely have to do this,
yeah.
right? I mean, you definitely have to do that, right? Is that what you're talking about? You definitely have to make the mustache 2 pieces to make it a lot easier. The mouth, you probably couldn't really do the 2 pieces. I mean, it'd be a lot easier if you just did the whole mouth as just one, circular, bottom piece of glass. But otherwise, when I first saw this one, I was like, wow, it's hardly anything you have to do to it. You don't even have to do anything to the beard. You could come in, though, if you want to make it easier for you, and you could put something in that maybe look like his chin or something, right, that does something along this line. You can see I just drew that in real quick. But so it breaks it up into several pieces, which makes it easier to cut. Again, trying to make that look like it's part of the design, right? Like I meant that intentionally. That's always sort of the point.
Same with the hat? Or
with the
like
hat.
the
the hat would probably, you're right, the hat's probably going to be also like we did with the beard. You would probably soften, some of these things. You could, do this kind of a thing, right, and make the hat, into several pieces, just so it was easier to cut. Sometimes I think it makes it look more interesting also. Some of it has to do with the glass. Maybe if you had a really nice kind of a textured glass, you might want to try to leave it as one piece so it shows up a little bit more better. But, again, the point is break lines are necessary, so make them part of the design, right? You incorporate them in if you can. I just want to show you this other Santa because I was looking at Santa faces before I did this one. And this one I thought was, we would have to do a couple things to the eyebrows, but for the most part, they're nice because they're hidden up into the cap part of the cap. All you would have to do is really, this would have to be a little more rounded, right? You couldn't do something such a sharp point, but that, just draw on top of it and you've got a new line to follow. Some parts of this one were trickier, right? We would do, you'd have to do something with the cheeks, so you would want to just make those actually part of the, instead of having a line there, the nose would have to be one single piece, but the mouth would have to be something simpler, right? But you can sort of see. my point while I was trying to, just trying to help you guys realize that there's other options out there for patterns, and don't be afraid to try it. I do a lot of my own patterns, and I can tell you the best way to test them out is just to try to cut some glass. And it's not unusual to have to go back and go, wow, I really can't cut those eyebrows like I thought I could, and you just, make the cut simpler and you adjust from that, right? I mean, I tell people all the time, nobody knows the pattern you started with, right? They see the finished panel, but they don't know what you started with, so you don't have to stay true to the panel, you don't have to try to, impress anybody. So hopefully that you guys found that slightly interesting.
Yeah, that's great.
But you're going to find something way more interesting, because Daisy's going to talk about what a perfect time of year to do these quick gifts, right?
So, here at Delphi, we sell these handy dandy scroll kits. And just spilled some water, but it's fine. Okay. And they look a little something like this. We've got some different patterns.
Is it
So we've got a more fall one here.
We've got holiday ones out and
Yep.
winter and spring.
Didn't have any. So the one that I'm doing today is this cardinal one. So it comes with full instructions and a pattern along with this kit. So you kind of have an idea of how it needs to go together. So on the back of that, there's all these instructions on where to put all the wire details and everything like that, but we will get into that in a minute here. So along with the scroll kits, we also have some other pre-cut kits. We have these that come with a ring. So it has this 8-inch ring with it, and everything kind of fixes onto that. So it makes it a little bit easier to hang if you want. So you can kind of hang it from that. We also have these little nightlight kits. So if you have maybe some kids you need to make some Christmas gifts for or something, and they want a little nightlight, we've got a lot of different styles of this. I made this frog one day because I felt like it. We've got like flamingos and a rooster and some dolphins, stuff
Hummingbirds.
like that. Yes,
Mhm.
hummingbirds. Hummingbirds are popular.
That was my present for my husband last year.
Yeah. All right. So the kit that I have today is these cardinals. So in this kit, it comes with this twisted wire, which is what the whole thing sits on. So all of our pieces are going to be attached to that twisted wire.
Nice.
So part of this pattern here shows you how to kind of bend it so that you can have it in the right shape and you can easily hang it. You don't have to mess around with it once you get everything put on there. So I'm just gonna roughly bend it to this shape here. It doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be kind of able to hold things, right?
Is it copper wire? Is it just I'm pretty sure it's tin
I
copper wire.
think it is.
Yeah. So my point was you could make your own, right? If
Yeah,
you're trying to
yeah.
replicate this, you could.
Do they sell them as spools, like regular, like?
Yeah, the wire we do, it comes in little spools and.
It's not pre-twisted, but you could definitely take this.
Oh, it's not. Okay.
No, this
Oh, yeah,
comes
sorry.
pre-twisted with the kit.
Yeah.
Our normal copper wire does not come twisted, but you could certainly twist them together and make it your own that way.
Okay.
So the wire is a little bit longer than the pattern, but that's fine because, like we said, it doesn't have to be perfect. Nobody knows what it looked like before.
Craig, circling back, if you want to make painted eyes for stained glass, do you cut out the eyes, then paint and bake them, or paint, bake, then cut them from the glass? I would cut them out of the glass first,
Oh, yeah, cut them.
in case something goes wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
hmm
Yeah, because if something goes wrong while you're cutting them, right? So
Mhm.
I would cut the glass first, paint them, fire them, and do that.
And Craig, to answer your previous question, I saw that come through. For using those glass line paints, there is just a top temperature, so cooling rate, duration, all of that, you can typically go off of your standard fusing schedules. If there's something really specific, the paint would include those directions.
Otherwise, it's loud. So the good thing about this is you know that your pieces are nice and protected and they're not going to be jostled around in the box and get all broken and cracked. But it's also nice that they're pre-cut. You don't have to spend time cutting all these weird shapes. Using these newfound skills that we just taught you. So one thing I will say about these pre-cut kits, the pieces are already, you know, cut in the shape they need, but they're also ground on the edges, so they're not sharp and they're ready to go. You don't have to spend any time grinding any weird spots down or anything like that. You can just open this right up, make a quick little project, and you're good to go.
Perfect for the weekend.
Yeah.
Or the night before Christmas. Either or.
Last minute Christmas gift, it's fine. Alright, so in this, we will be using what we call hobby cane. So it is lead cane. And as you can see, it's really flexible. And I can move it around just with my hands, which makes it great for these weird shapes, but also really quick because you're not spending all that time foiling and then crimping it down, burnishing it, getting everything set. I can just wrap this, tack it together, and I have my piece. So in these kits, it does show where to start and end your lead cane for easiest assembly. So we are going to follow that. We're going to do one of the leaves because that seems easiest. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of push it to be up against that. And I'm just going to slowly go around, and any weird little curves, I am going to kind of form it to that shape.
What do you use for like deeper like curves, like that leaf right here? It's kind of, how do you get?
So just like with the little curves and everything, you would just kind of fold it like
Pre-bend
that
a little
and
bit.
just kind of push it in there until it touches that edge.
Gotcha.
So I've got it all the way around. I'm just going to take some lead nippers, sold here, don't find. And I'm going to cut that straight across like that. So then I have this piece of lead that is now the shape of my leaf. And I will put a piece of, or a bead of solder right there, and that'll hold it together. So I'm going to do that with all of these pieces, and then I can get it all stuck onto my twisted wire.
What size of cane are you using? So Jamie, this is hobby cane. And
5/64.
I think so.
5/64?
64th, but if you want to find hobby cane, you can just search hobby cane and
It'll
the
automatically
size
come
will
up.
come up. You don't have to search any measurements or anything like that.
Are there different sizes for?
Yeah, so that lead panel that was over there, that has the H channel. So this is technically a U channel, even though it's super duper skinny. But one side is flat, and it comes up like this.
Okay.
So it has a channel for your glass. So we do have larger sizes of the U channel and the H channel. So if you had a small round panel and you didn't want to bend some zinc cane to fit around it, and you're okay with just having a lead U channel around it, you could absolutely do that.
Craig is asking, with that kit, you don't have to pre-stretch the lead.
Yeah, we had a little, Daisy and I had a little discussion earlier about pre-stretching the lead. So one of the, normally you stretch lead, right? So you stretch lead so it stiffens it, 'cause otherwise it's really quite flexible. This is so small that if you do stretch it, you just have to stretch it a tiny bit, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like the kit doesn't come with lead. You have to buy the lead, right?
Yep.
So if you buy it from us, sometimes we'll get it just the way that it's sitting here. We'll roll it up, and then I think just the process of the guys rolling it to put it into a bag stiffens it to the point where you don't really need to do anything else to it.
Yeah.
Kimberly,
It's so thin. If you do try to stretch it, sometimes you'll snap it, right? So
Kimberly's asking, is stretching lead came not required? So typically,
Not required. I would say that it's probably, you should always stretch the lead, even if it's just a tiny bit. Because again, let me grab this panel real quick and let me just show you that. So if you don't stretch the lead over time, the weight of the glass is going to start to pull all the lead will start to stretch. And you can imagine on a large panel, I mean, they can get real bad, you know. So that's why you stiffen it, because that's why you stretch it, because it stiffens the lead. So
How do you do
I would.
that?
Yeah, so how do you do it? There's a couple ways of doing it. One is, literally, you grab one end with a pair of pliers and your buddy grabs the other end with a pair of pliers and you pull on it a little bit, right? We sell a vise, or if you have access to a vise at home, you can clamp one end in a vise and it's just you pulling the one end. And you just need to stiffen it. I mean, so it's not like, so the lead cane, even that one that Daisy's using, is 6 feet long. So that you would barely stretch at all, but like on a bigger cane, you might stretch it an inch or two at the most, right? So not a lot. So you're not like massively stretching it, right? I mean, you're just trying to stiffen it. The lead, when you first get it, it's easy to get it kind of kinks in it and stuff like that. So that's the other thing you're trying to do when you stretch, is also straighten it out, take the kinks out, and that's usually good enough. So.
Is that also how you stretch, or do you have to do that for overlay too?
No, any kind of overlay work. We don't have to stretch any of that sort of stuff, those materials. Oh, the other thing, real quick, is I know people have been asking about the size of the canes. So the numbers, like when we say a cane is 5/64, so we say it's a 1/4 inch or whatever, it refers to what's called the face of the cane, which is, so in a panel like this is the face, right? So across here. So the sizes don't refer to the channel or the opening of the channel. It refers, and I know like Daisy has mentioned many, many times, that's the face of the cane. This little tiny skinny part
and
is the
it's
face.
even so hard to see on here.
Yeah. That's the face. Oh, see
So that side there,
That's the face.
this is the face.
Yeah, that's
The outside
face.
edge, the teeny tiny bit.
That's the face. So.
5/64 of an inch, so it's teeny
But as
tiny.
Daisy was commenting, like, so if you had a round piece that you wanted to put something around, you would go with one of the wider ones that's a little more substantial. So
Yeah.
visually you can see it, but it's also a little stronger than one. This is really just covering edges is all
Yeah.
this is doing.
And I've done this at home, and I don't know if it's the greatest, but if you do have something that's a little wet noodly, and like you said, you don't have to really stretch this very much. This stuff is so small. That's enough.
Wow.
Do you see how it kind of holds the shape more? I can just pull it, and it stiffens it just enough that I know that it's gonna stay a little bit better, especially in those like tight spots there. And yeah, so with the smaller stuff, just brute force. I would put some gloves on. Otherwise, it kind of digs into your fingers and it doesn't feel great. But so since we are using lead, and I don't know if we mentioned the lead.
Yeah, I was thinking that we haven't actually talked too much about the safety of handling lead or solder, right?
So if you can see, just in the little bit of time that I've touched this lead, my fingers are dirty, and that's just because it's a hard metal, it's gross metal, but I'm not going to eat or drink anything until I scrub my hands really well. I'm not going to touch my face or anything because it's lead. It is the real lead. So if you are working with lead on a panel, just kind of be aware of what you're doing, and kind of, if you are really committed to it, just work on that. And once you're done, before you even do anything else, just make sure you wash your hands really, really well.
What about with solder? Like how safety, like gloves? Like is that?
Oh well, exactly the same thing. I know. I earlier when I was soldering, I didn't really talk about that too much, and I apologize for that. But it's the same thing that Daisy's talking about. It's a handling issue. So I mean, just handling it like this, your skin is too tough to absorb lead, so you're not gonna get lead, soaking through your fingers, right? So it's just like, as Daisy pointed out, it's on the surface of your hands, so you just have to wash it. I mean, I know some people that will wear gloves when they're soldering, and I think, probably one less step, they can just take the gloves off and throw them away and not have to go wash their hands. But I like to, I'm washing my hands, that's how I'm doing it. I just feel better.
And same with all the other processes throughout, like washing, patina, all that stuff.
Yeah,
You don't need
pretty
to-
much. Yeah.
Yeah.
So normally, like the process again, like even what Daisy's doing is she's going to be using flux, so we're going to be cleaning at some point. So I wait always till the very end, like so I don't, when I'm done soldering, I don't just go wash my hands, right? Because I know that I'm going to have to clean the flux off and do that off the panel anyway. So that's when I do all my cleaning at the same time. So yeah.
And if lead being on your hands is something that you are concerned about or anything like that, we do sell actually a hand soap. It's called D-Lead, and it has a little bit of like an abrasive,
gritty
feel to it. And what that's doing, it's literally scrubbing the surface of your skin to kind of help clean that off and make sure that
it works real well.
it's really off of there. But yeah, I use
Which
that
one
sometimes.
was it?
It's called D-Lead. It's kind of like an orangey yellow
Yeah,
color.
it's got this
So
like
it
a
looks
little
like
bit
that orange something.
Yeah, there's another one that they make like
For
mechanics
mechanics.
use. I can't
Yeah.
remember what that's called, but
It's
I'm sure
orange
it's a similar
something.
stuff.
Yeah.
Or
It's
something.
probably very similar. Yeah.
Oh yeah, but so if that's anything you're concerned about, we do have something to specifically get it off your hands and make sure it's off. Working with lead, as we talked about, lead does have a lower melting point. So with the cooler tips, the 600 degree instead of the 700 degree, if you're not careful, you will melt right through this, especially with this really skinny stuff. So when I tack this together, I'm really just tacking it together. I don't want to hold any heat on here. I even turn this down. I set it to the 360, so that's 360 Celsius, which is 680 in Fahrenheit. Where I usually keep it, the 410, it's about 770, so it's even closer to 800. So I do like to work a little bit hotter, I guess. But this 680 Fahrenheit might even be a little hot, but I'm really not going to touch this for very long, and it's going to be all stuck together and fine. So we do need to flux because it is metal. We're trying to stick some solder to it, so you don't need much, just right where you're going to stick it together, and that's about it.
Oh gosh, she needs some solder. I'm hoarding it. Sorry. There you go. I'm difficult to work with.
So the nice thing about these solder spools is you can bend it and it stays.
Yeah.
So because this is a tiny piece, I'm not gonna like set it down and try and maneuver that. So I'm gonna make this so that I can easily reach it. So I'm holding my piece and my soldering iron. I'm just gonna pull a little bit off of there. You can see that bead on there.
You can get closer if you want.
And I just barely touched it,
Oh wow.
and that's all stuck together.
If you want to see, yeah, you can see how, right? Just all it takes, just that tiny bit, right? It's
Yeah.
It's nice.
You get a little steam and it just.
Good work.
So that's not super duper pretty, but whatever. It's all going on here, and as long as the whole thing looks nice, right?
I'm sure there's only other stained glass people that go up and look at like how you soldered. So.
Right. I'm actually going to do a little bit of wire detailing.
We probably won't do the whole project from start to finish, I'm guessing.
I'm kind of cutting it down to. So this looks like that fits there. So I know that that is that leaf there. So it comes with this little bit of wire here, a couple pieces, so you have enough to do all these kind of crazy looking details. So I'm just gonna kind of bend this to my pattern. Oh, that's close enough. And I'm not going to use the same pliers that I used to cut the lead. I am going to use actual wire cutters.
Yeah, you don't want to damage your lead.
Yes.
lead nippers,
Okay.
Right, and some of the hard wires can damage the lead nippers.
So I'm going to just snip it at the very end there. Kind of mark it. There we go. So you can put it to the pattern. It might be a little bit smarter to put it to your piece because it might not totally fit. But I can just set that on there and you can see it looks just like that.
So there's people like asking like, do we sell the tools that Daisy just showed? Yes. We do sell both of those, the lead nippers and the little wire cutters, which come in handy. But.
Wait, here.
Yeah.
Here, at So how we were talking about the wire before, it is pre-tinned wire. We still have to flux it, of course, but that's all I have to do. I don't have to make it silver or anything. So I just want to decide where I'm putting that, and I'm just gonna put a little bit of flux there.
So you're putting it right on top of the thing, the side.
Yep.
Okay, not like in.
You could do it either way,
yeah.
right? The problem is, I mean, I'm pretty sure she's going like on top just because it's easier to attach it.
Yeah.
You know, if you're just trying to butt up against it, if there's a gap there, sometimes the solder won't jump
Yeah.
out. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So I like to do one end and just focus on that one end to get it attached to it.
Okay.
So same thing, I just have a little bit of solder and I'm just gonna barely touch it. So now that wire is on there. I can pick that up and it's stuck. But I don't want to leave it like that. I am going to, you know, put a little bit there just so it completely stays in place. Yeah.
Craig is asking, could this kit be done with copper foil method or is it designed for construction with lead cane?
We've done with copper foil before.
I've done mine as copper foil.
Yeah, I've done them as copper foil. It's just more time consuming, right? And then there's something nice about how the edges look with the lead cane on them, but it's a matter of personal taste, right? I mean, that's all stained glass really is
Yeah.
someone's opinion about what.
So none of this is attached in the middle, huh?
Yeah, only at the edges,
Yeah,
right? You
yeah.
see that?
The wire here is
Yeah.
It's
just
like a wire frame set
there.
on here and
Yeah.
attached to the cane. That's awesome.
You know, like when I was showing the fish and talking about doing the mouth
Yeah,
with the
yeah.
wire, you know, I mean, that's what's nice about wire. I think it's one of those underused things. It's a great way of adding detail to something without having to cut. Like instead of having to cut two halves of the leaf, right?
Sure.
And then plus you get this delicate little line from the wire, which sometimes is nice that you don't always get from soldering pieces
Right.
together. So.
Yeah. So now that I have this leaf, I'm gonna kind of see where it is on here. So it would be soldered on with that little wire, and on this pattern here you can kind of see it butts up to that cardinal beak. So you might take a little bit of solder and just tack those together as well, just to give it a little more strength. On these flower pieces here as well. So like that would go right there, and you would tack that right there.
How do you do that? What, like just on top or just?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I will wrap this last piece here, and I will demonstrate that. And just kind of snip that off. A little bit of a gap there. Well. You just put a little bit of flux. And I can cover that right up. So even if there's a little bit of a gap, just like with the copper foil, you can cover it a little bit,
Nice.
especially with this stuff. Now you don't want to have gaps with doing bigger lead panels and things like that, but with this you can kind of get away with it a little bit. So that's kind of in line there. Yeah. So see where that's touching? I would just put a little bit of flux there, and then just like I did with the wire, I'm gonna just take that and put a little thing there. So now those are stuck together. And I can move that around. And then instead of this just being held by that wire, that's going to give it a little more stability, so it's not going to eventually break off. Like I know that some of these have a little bit with it's just attached with wire. Some of these have snapped off. But this, like it's attached to that leaf and that leaf there. So it's got that support on both sides. So, yeah. That's focus.
You should attach it to the wire. How do you do that?
Oh,
I know. I'm recording it. I call her on.
okay.
Hey, if
So-
you didn't, I would have.
Same thing, just gonna tack it on there. Super duper simple. So I'm just gonna hold that in place. If it'll even attach.
Yeah, do you see how like Daisy paused after tack soldering it right for a minute or two? You know, we all do it without really explaining. I guess what we're doing, we're letting the solder solidify, right? Because it stays molten for a little while. And if you just tack soldered it and just got away from it, it would obviously just pop back apart.
But it's really quick though. How?
Yeah, isn't
Yeah.
it? Super nice.
So if you wrapped all those in your lead came and got it all put together, it would look like this, but a lot more.
How do you keep it staying shiny
You look at it for the first like couple weeks and then you stop.
and then you stop?
Yeah, you see like this one in particular. I mean, we've had this one I know for a while, and you can see, especially when you compare it to how this one sort of looks, how much it's oxidized. The only way to try to prevent that is by waxing them.
Okay.
But you can imagine, waxing something like that, I know from personal experience, is a challenge. So what you can do though is if you wax it afterwards, if you go in with a really soft toothbrush, you'll be able to get some of the wax that gets caught under all the wires and caught in all the little nooks and crannies. But it's just, I know, it's a ton of work.
I was gonna say, I mean, there's got to be some sort of maintenance to it.
Well, the other thing people do also is after cleaning is they sometimes will spray them with a clear lacquer.
Oh, wow.
Which you can just buy a can of clear lacquer, at the home improvement store and then just spray them. I've done that actually on pieces, especially things I've put outside before to help protect the just the look of the solder or the cane.
And that doesn't do anything to the metal.
No, not at all. Yeah, you won't even notice it. You just spray it on and it just looks pretty much the same. Yeah, nice. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of Tiffany style lamps are actually lacquered.
Really?
Yep. Mainly because they put a lot of time into all the whole piece, right? But also in the patinas, and so it's a way of protecting the patina too, is by spraying a clear lacquer coat over the surface. Okay. And they spray everything: the glass, the whole thing.
So this would be like I said, I bought the beveled glass hummingbird, or my husband did for me, the hummingbird kit. And it's going to end up being a round circle that's like about this big. So that was why my sole purpose today coming out to find out what to put around that edge.
All right.
That would be a good choice.
Yeah, you could definitely do that for that piece. How big is it again? Is it like about
12, 14
Oh
inches.
yeah, I think that's fine. Personally, I think you start getting to like the 20-inch size circles, then you might want to think more about zinc, because the strength is probably the bigger issue. But 12, 14 inches is not that big. You could easily do the letter on those. Yeah, it'd be a nice edge to it, right?
Yeah, it's pretty. I like the way it looks like that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for joining us. I know we ran a little bit over on Facebook Live, but this was fun. This was our first live event done here. So
a combination, right? We were on Facebook Live. We got live people in here. The room was like packed. So
yes, Daisy's premiere.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll see her more because I'm
Don't expect
I'm
it.
going to drag her in front of the camera. So.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today.